I
should take the verb.
Yeah.
I, John Peter Amewu,
swear by the Almighty God
swear by the Almighty God
that the evidence I shall give before this committee touching the matter in issue shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help me God.
So help me God.
Honorable, are you okay? Very well. Honorable John Peter Amewu, MP for Hohoe and Minister-Designate for Railway Development. This is your first time as a Member of Parliament, but you have been a Minister of State, in charge of 2 ministries. First, lands and natural resources, and then energy. These are all I know. Is there anything else we must know?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, rightly put it, my name is John Peter Amewu. I hail from Hohoe in the Volta region. I was born to the late Simon Peter Amewu and my mother, Gertrude Anani Agbeli, in some village called Litoje in the Hohoe district. Mr. Chairman, I'm currently married to Sesina, my black Goji. We have 3 children, Fafali Amewu, Jifa Amewu, and Emefa Amewu. Briefly, Mr. Chairman, I'll take you through my educational background. I started my education in primary school in Androkofe.
Honorable, if you don't mind, just tell us your last one. The last one you obtained. We are not interested in.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, as detailed out in my CV, details of my educational background are provided in my CV. And as you rightly put it, I was once a Minister of Lands and Natural Resources, ending up at Ministry of Energy as a sector minister.
Chairman,
and currently, Mr. Chairman,
Minister, from what period to what period, for our record? You were once Minister for Lands and Forestry. What period to what period? What was your start? What was your sunset? You want to guide us with that? I'm now perusing that aspect of your CV.
Mr. Chairman, I was at the Ministry of Lands and Natural Resources from February 2017 to August 2018. Minister of Energy from September 2018 to December 2020, Mr. Chairman.
To December or to January?
December 2020, that's January 7th as a sector minister.
Well, did your mandate as Minister for Energy end on 31st December 2020? Is that what you are suggesting?
Not again, Mr. Chairman, as a Minister for
Ministry of Energy, Minister, in your CV, September 2018 to December 2020. And I'm saying, is it correct to suggest that your mandate ended 31st December 2020? That cannot be correct. Probably CV January 2021.
My mandate should be ended in January 7, 2021.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And Chairman, you are going to the Ministry for Railway Development. Does Ghana have a railway development plan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ghana as a country has a comprehensive, well-detailed railway development plan across length and breadth of this country. I currently have a copy of the railway development plan that has been designed and concluded by the current government. Work has started with successive governments. The current government has amended the development plan that was commenced some years back. So yes, of course, Mr. Chairman, currently we have a railway development master plan.
Chairman, in the nominees briefing as sector Minister-Designate, what has been brought to your attention in terms of railway development in the country? What should Ghanaians expect? What is going on from Tema, Akusumbo, Takwa?
Mr. Chairman, the existing railway network in the country is made up of 3 major lines, the Western, Eastern, and then the Central line. Cumulatively, these add up to 947 kilometers. Mr. Chairman, the existing network is largely confined to the southern parts of the country, with the city of Kumasi being its northernmost parts of the lines that have been built. Mr. Chairman, these lines were built during the British colonial period, and they are all narrow gauge with single tracks with a maximum axle load of about just 16 tons. Largely not operational except for freight currently that we see along some of the lines. The current passenger lines that we have run from Accra to Kumasi, which was operational sometime, but had to be put to a halt as a result of the COVID. The state of the current infrastructure, Mr. Chairman, it's the development of the Western line from Takoradi to Kumasi, which is 340 kilometers, the redevelopment of the Eastern line from Tema through Accra to Kumasi, which is also 330 kilometers, the construction of the central spine from Kumasi through Paga, 595 kilometers on the Burkina Faso border, and also the Ghana-Burkina Faso Railway Connectivity Project. Development of Metro Line Rail, also both in Accra and Kumasi, are also high in the agenda. So, Mr. Chairman, briefly, that's some of the important points within the current railway development master plan that we have.
Okay, Chairman, Mr. Nominee, you are a Minister for Energy. We'll come to your performance at that level. But Chairman, on the 7th of January, when the Speaker was to be elected with Parliament being sworn in some of the videos that we have watched and in some of the commentaries that we have heard, regrettable incident, which is a negative on our parliamentary democracy. You were heard, kindly put your mic off, Chairman. You were heard in some nice Muslim bubu dress. I'll kill. Did you mean that? I'll kill you all. And I'm told that your words was used as justification by those who ought not to be on the floor of Parliament, like the security invasion. So you were heard, I'll kill you. Did you mean that? And what did you mean by I'll kill you? And who were you targeting to kill?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, the night of 7th January actually was a black day in Ghana's democracy. Yes, of course, Mr. Chairman, I used that word. I regretted it. As I stood before this platform, I want to withdraw that word unconditionally. My constituents, of course, are watching me. Mr. Chairman, I'm a peaceful man. Of course, the use of the word came out of overreaction, which is, of course, one of my negative aspects, overreaction. Mr. Chairman, I'm trying to work on that, and I unconditionally withdraw
overreaction, were you saying in a fit of anger?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, in an anger mood, I use that word.
Who angered you? I was asking who angered you? Who angered you? Follow up the chairman.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I wish my entry to the hall should have been played back. As a first-timer entry into this hall, my good friends, colleagues, from the part of region that I came from, together with other members, welcoming in quite a bit hostile way. I thought, as a new member, having won a very difficult seat, as we chair, only to be hooted at, Juloe, Fiafito, and all those words. That actually was a trigger, but jokingly, they were of course joking. That was also a trigger of my anger by using that word. Mr. Chairman, I reiterated to say that I unconditionally withdraw the word.
Mr. Chair, just for clarification, because you see, I was here myself, that when the Volta caucus mainly received you in that joking language, and you say that you jokingly said, I'll kill you, I'll kill you.
No, remember, he said a fit of anger.
I want
him into another temptation.
Let's go. So, Agalia,
so, Honorable Agalia.
Thank you.
So you were joking?
Joking.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Honorable nominee, I'm sure you have been briefed by the Ministry for Railway Development. And in those briefings, you must have been told that one major challenge that confronts the Ministry for Railways Development is the unavailability of land and challenges associated with land acquisition for the right of way. Now, if you're giving the nod, how do you intend to navigate around this very difficult issue?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, it's a fact that right of way is gradually graduating to a very serious problem within the railway ministry in terms of acquisition of land for the tracks. If this honorable House grants me the nod going forward, we would have to include the cost of acquisition of land in the project cost. The problem in the past was as a result of separating land acquisition from the construction. Because most of this funding are global funds that are sourced specifically for the project, my understanding and my thinking, if given the nod, is that if we built it in as a component of the project construction cost, then payment of acquisition becomes easier and right of way will quickly be acquired for construction and completion of the railway line projects. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Now, Honorable Amewu, globally, funds for capital-intensive projects are currently very limited due to the COVID pandemic. And yet, we know that railway development requires huge investment with good returns on the investments. But in the face of the COVID pandemic, how do you intend to attract investment for the development of the railway sector?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, the railway sector generally should be looked as a social project. I deviate lightly from the school of thought that believe that the railway should be an investment project. If the railway sector is taken as a social project for which government funding of the project will reflect on the balance sheet of the government, then the after effect of the railway, which will drive the growth of the GDP, will be worth paying for the cost of construction. Mr. Chairman, it is very difficult for a global fund these days, say $2.4 billion, to be run on a railway track of about 2,000 kilometers and expect a payback period between 30 and 50 years. I don't see any investor doing that. No prudent investment analysis will trigger such decision to commit such a fund. But if rather government puts that money on its balance sheet as a debt, and the impact of the construction generates economic growth in terms of GDP growth, then that will be worth paying. So I'll be considering the railway project as a social investment project, rather as a social project, rather than an investment project or product. But notwithstanding that, Mr. Chairman, some of the routes are still profitable. And so if it is analyzed and determined that investment decision will be taken based on profitability index, and the investors are convinced beyond all reasonable doubt, of course, we will identify those routes based on their analysis and give it out to them as an investment product. For instance, there is a school of thought that the continuation of the railway line from Tema, through Akosombo to Mpakadam, that particular line, which will end up in Burkina Faso as a continental development project. That line, for instance, has been classified by most analysts as a profitable venture. Those one can go into investment product where we can package it, maybe on build, operate, and transfer for a larger period or as a concession for the investors.
Mr. Honorable Amewu, some transport analysts have argued that in our country, Ghana, which has a huge infrastructure deficit with respect to our road network, which is estimated to be in the tune of $5 billion US, that it is not even necessary to have a ministry, such as a ministry for railway development and seek to invest in that sector, but rather that we should concentrate on bridging the gaps or the deficit with respect to the road sector. With those views, do you think the ministry that would superintend over if given the nod is relevant?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I would beg to differ from the school of thought about the deficit. Yes, of course, the deficit exists in the range of about 5 billion, as you rightly put it. And the attention, therefore, for any emerging country might be, let's not concentrate on other sectors, but let's put attention on the roads and begin to fix our roads. Mr. Chairman, the railway sector has its own advantage. The lifespan of most of our roads that we witness in the country, maximum at 11 years. A railway sector that is well constructed can take up to, a minimum of about 50 years. The advantage is that when you put your railway lines in order, then you are going to migrate traffic from the current existing dense traffic on our roads to the railway. Already, most of our trucks, that lies on the roads are above the axle load, but because they don't have any alternative routes to use, they were forced to go on those routes. And that is why we have most of our roads within a few, years currently are in a very deplorable state. With the construction of the railway sector, you are going to migrate those traffic onto the rail line. One great advantage that the railway line also does is that a number of passengers and goods can be moved within the shortest possible time. For instance, the standard gauge that the country is trying to introduce now is going to run at a speed of almost about 160 kilometers per hour. What that does is that people will get to their destination on time. Productivity will increase, because if you quite recollect, you sit in a railway, you can confidently conduct your business in a railway. So people who will be in a railway can equally be working in the railway line because of the stability and the level of angles at which it travels out. So with the introduction of railway, we expect growth in GDP of this country, and that is why I think that we need to combine both the railway and then the road. His Excellency President Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, in his inaugural address, stated categorically about his intention, to make sure that the railway industry becomes a very viable sector in this country. And I think that we have to work in accordance with that direction.
You are done, right? No, I'm not allowing you. Yes, Honorable. Sorry, I'm looking for some document to assist us.
No. I'm grateful, Honorable Chair. Congratulations, Honorable John Peter Amewu, on your nomination. Let me take you back to your previous portfolio at the Energy Ministry. On 24th May 2019, in your press briefing, you indicated, among other things, that the energy sector arrears as of January 2019 stood at 2.74 $8 million. You went further to forecast that an additional $1.268 million will be added to the debt within the same year. In your conclusion, you intimated that the debt will grow to more than $12.564 million by end of 2023. What, in your view, contributed to this compounding debt, and what interventions did you undertake to minimize this increase in debt during your tenure?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, yes, it's true. I raised those points whilst at the sector. There were various factors that contributed to the debt we have within the energy sector. Key among them has to do with the consumptions of energy by the various metropolitan ministries, departments, and agencies. Mr. Chairman, another point has to do with the losses. The losses are both what we witness at the distribution end and also at the supply end, where we have a lot of power theft and collections that have not been keyed in properly. We have managerial problems also within the sector. Mr. Chairman, among them also is the obsolete equipment that we have currently within the electricity sector. Most of the equipment that we have are some that are lasting quite close to about 40, 50 years and have not been replaced. When you have this sort of obsolete equipment, transmission of electricity through them is at risk because you lose most of the, the current before they get to the burner tip where the consumer is waiting to get it. So these couples of factors, are very key in raising the debt we have in the system. One of the key factors has to do with the feed. By the feed, I'm talking about the fuel or the gas. The gas supply is also a component of the electricity. Don't forget, the electricity is just a derived demand. So at that end, other factors that go in to drive the generations are also key components. And so if you add all these components together, our estimation was rightly what we said. But, Mr. Chairman, that assertion was based on the fact that if nothing is done, we're going to continue with the debt profile as I've stated. Fortunately, before I left the ministry, we put in a lot of measures with the assistance of Cabinet. We came out with the Energy Recovery Program. We have done the master gas house clearing processes. We have tried to migrate some of the power plants that were previously feeding on hard fuel, heavy fuel. Of course, Mr. Chairman, gas is cheaper. So where you have a stranded gas that has not been put into good use, and you are using a heavy fuel, you expect the burner tip price that the consumer pays to be higher. Currently, most of our generations, more than 60 to 65% are running on gas together with the Akosombo. So these measures that we put in, gradually it's addressing the energy debt problem that we have. Mr. Chairman, I also use this opportunity to announce to Ghanaians that as today, Ghana government has fully paid its debts that it owes ECG. All the debts that Ghana government owes, including the debts from the municipal, metropolitan, district administration, have been fully paid by the Ministry of Finance. And I think that that is a very good thing that the government has done. And ECG currently is even owing Ghana government an amount of about 400 million Ghana cedis, which is yet to be reconciled. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Very well, Honorable Minister. Now on railway development. Finding eminent expression the railway master plan, which I suppose you've obtained briefing on, are two major developments, the central line and the central spine. If you have obtained briefing on these developments, can you advise the committee on the status of each of these developments, considering that central line specifically passes through major towns in Asin South Constituency, Asin Adiemra, and even Asin Central, Asin Dompim, and Asin Posu, and assurance that you would give, when given the nod, that you would develop this line with alacrity to the benefit of the people of Asin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, yes, of course, the central line, the central spine, just as the western lines are very key, railway tracks within the master plan. Currently, work is progressing on the western line. A lot of feasibility studies have been done on the central spine, and other work have also been done on the eastern line. So I'm giving the House this assurance that if the House gives me the nod, I will move everything possible to make sure that this line is completed. The advantage of this line is the fact that it goes to some of our mineral deposit areas. Currently, for instance, most of our bauxite and manganese that have been transported have been done through the normal transportation system using road. And that is putting a lot of traffic on our roads, and our roads are not lasting as we expect. It is expectation that if these lines are completed, and the fact that they will be going through some of these mineral deposit areas, haulage will, of course, becomes very easy for the mine owners. And it will also reduce cost of transportation, which will therefore add value to government share in some of these mining communities. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes. Zuela.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Honorable Nominee. My first question has to do with the one district, one factory project in the first term of the MPP government. You will agree with me that it was one of your flagship programs. And I think some factories were constructed across the country. But we've also received reports about some of them not being connected to electricity, and the failure of the Energy Ministry then to facilitate the connection of these factories to electricity. What would you say were the reasons why these factories couldn't be connected, and at the time that you were Sector Minister for Energy? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, it's a fact that the one district, one factory is one of the key government policies that translates to its project. When, at the time I was the Sector Minister, we had a number of requests for the project. I can tell you on record that we have done more than 60% of those requests that have come to us. We've made sure that we send electricity to those areas. Of course, a number of them we've not been able to complete because some were requesting for transformers of different capacity. At that point in time, Mr. Chairman, we do not have some of those transformers in stock. But the materials that were available under our disposal, then with the collaboration of the Electricity Company of Ghana, we've been able to extend electricity to some of those areas. But yes, of course, it's on record that we've not been able to do all the 100%. My understanding is that because this is quite key to us, the incoming minister, as I've briefed him already, is going to take it up and make sure those areas that have not been connected, he will do to make sure that completion of those areas are also done within the shortest possible time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. My next question is on gas. Ghana is known to have excess supply of gas, and your ministry, whilst you were at Energy, you supervised the construction of an LNG reception and regasification facility, which commits Ghana to extra gas that we do not need. In the event that this contract is terminated at any time, would you agree with me that it will be tantamount to causing financial loss to the state?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, Mr. Chairman, I supervised the construction of an import terminal of an LNG whilst I was the Sector Minister. Currently, as we speak as of today, the demand-supply balances of our gas projected into future gives us an indication that there may be some deficit going into the future. Mr. President, Mr. Chairman, the major reasons why that project is coming on is not coming on as an element to balance demand and supply, but it's coming in as a security of supply issue. The energy sector is quite a very dicey sector. You would have witnessed the difficulty we have with our gas coming from Nigeria when the pipeline got broken. So to keep our lights on, it is proper that we put in measures to have a security of supply. And so that project, it's generally described as a security of supply measure to address the gas in the future. By 2027, the energy demand balances of gas clearly tells us that we may have some deficit from 2027, which is about 5 years from now to go. So it is also built in anticipations of the demand that may arise in future. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman, there is a follow-up, if you don't mind, with your leave. Honorable nominee, my colleague was asking you about a matter related to termination of contract and its possible judgment debt effect. Have you had the cost to terminate any contract upon assumption of office? I mean the Ministry of Energy, either you or your predecessor?
With regard to this specific project, there had not been any discussions to terminate the project, not at all. That discussions have not come up, Mr. Chairman. And we do not intend to terminate that project, Mr. Chairman.
Have you terminated any other contract?
Mr. Chairman, there is another LNG project called Waggle, which was supposed to be sited in Takoradi. Yes, Mr. Chairman, that project was terminated. It was not terminated by the ministry. It was terminated at convenience by the supplier. So yes, of course, Waggle terminated that contract on its own. Yeah, it's the one that resulted into about 50 million judgment debt. There were two contracts that were terminated. One was the power project, which is the GPGC, and then the other is the LNG project. The LNG resulted in a judgment debt of about $50 million US.
Yes, you can have your laugh.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a follow-up to the second question. Mr. Nominee, please, considering the effect of the surplus gas on Ghana, what plans would you say you left behind to address that serious problem?
The issue of the surplus gas, which was becoming more of a problem in terms of the debt that the energy sector has been addressed through a number of ways. The first was to institute what we call the natural gas clearinghouse methodology. Mr. Chairman, we have gas coming from 3 different sources in Ghana. We have, just excuse me to say, the OCTP, which we call the ENI gas. We have gas coming from Nigeria, which we call the pipeline gas. And then we also have the gas coming from the TEN and Jubilee, which is the associated gas. Mr. Chairman, these gases, for instance, the Jubilee and TEN gases were priced at 1.2 and 1.75 per MMBTU. Gas coming from Nigeria is priced at a different price, if I quite remember, about $7.9 per MMBTU. And then our own domestic gas also priced at a different level. So there was a complete confusion in the sector as to how these gases, though commingled together, but spent by various power users, will be paid for. So what we have done is to come out with an average system to price all these gases. So currently, all the gases have been commingled, and they've been priced at a price of 6.08 MMBTU, unit. What that does is that anybody that is, of course, consuming gas above, the average price, of course, would have to pay for by those who are consuming gas below the average price. So, for instance, if you are taking more of the Jubilee gas, which you are expected to pay about 1.27, but because of the commingled price, you will now be paying an extra more than the 2.77. You are expected to refund that balance to another sector, say VRA. So the gas clearinghouse system is now putting in measures to make sure that we are about to address these imbalances in the payment of the gas system. This is one of the major things that we have left behind to address some of the wastage in the gas system. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Honorable Grant.
Thank you, Honorable Chairman. Mr. Nominee, I've heard you give answers on contract termination. I think about 2 questions in that direction. But I want to be very specific on this one. The International Court of Arbitration has awarded a cost of $134 million and an interest of $30 million against the government of Ghana over a cancellation of the emergency power agreement with GP Limited. 1, were you the minister responsible at the time of the termination? And if so, what led to the termination, and what is all this termination and judgment debt about? If you can be very specific to the committee and to Ghanaians to understand what has happened.
The government of Ghana, represented by the erstwhile Ministry of Power, signed a gas and sales purchase agreement with the West Africa Gas Limited, which we call WAGL. And that is the seller, dated on 7th of October 2015, for supply of 120 million cubic feet standard feet of gas, which of course is regasified, known as the LNG, for an initial period of 5 years. Mr. Chairman, following counter proposal dated on the 15th of March 2016, the seller has reviewed this term where the initial period had now been moved from 5 years to 10 years, and the gas price brought down to $3.3 per MMBTU from 2.2 to 2.33 to 2.4. So the period has changed from 5 to 10 years, and the price has also reduced to 2.22. Mr. Chairman, on assumption of office by this government, there were an attempt to re-engage the WAGL, which is the company, about the model of construction and siting. Mr. Chairman, I quite remember that the site has been relocated to Second D from Tema. Discussion progressed on how soon the construction should commence. My understanding was that the WAGL, wrote further to the ministry at that time. Mr. Chairman, I must also put it on record that I was not the sector minister at the time of this termination. No, I was not the sector minister. What I came to do was to address the difficulties experienced by WAGL and to invite WAGL back to the discussion table. We did invite them to come back for us to discuss. Unfortunately, at the time of discussion, when we approached the Attorney General did state that a contract that is terminated cannot be renegotiated. So on that basis, we have to enter into new terms of agreement. It was at the point that we were discussing of getting into new term of agreement that we had a letter, which of course was during my era, by the WAGL company, that they have terminated the contract on their own. They were then demanding for a debt of about $1 billion. They went into arbitration, and the court awarded $50 million against the government of Ghana. That is a brief about the termination of the WAGL contract.
As a follow-up, did you say that you tried to re-engage them after the termination?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. After the termination, which was somewhere in June, Mr. Chairman, I have here a letter in my hand, which I can tell them the 13th of February about the termination. After this termination, I got to the office in September 2012.
Chairman, we request further details. Letter 13, what? Signed by who? What title? You are speaking for our record. So give us the details. I will know who is responsible for this judgment debt, who terminated it. Read it fully for us for our record, Chair.
Mr. Chairman, attended in this letter dated 13th of February 2018, emergency power purchase agreement between the government of Ghana and GPGC Limited, termination notice. I was terminated on 13th of February 2018 by my predecessor, signed by Honorable Boachi Ajako. Mr. Chairman, but I would think and suspected strongly that his termination was also based on advice from other sectors, because unilaterally, you cannot just terminate a contract of this nature on your own. So he may also have gotten advice based on which he acted. I should read the letter.
No, I'm not, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, nominee, we have a problem with roads. Most of our country trunk roads have not seen bitumen, and in the 2020 campaign, everywhere you go across the country, the key issue was roads, 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 and more roads. Why do you think that we should prioritize railway when the basic has not been dealt with?
Mr. Chairman, as stated earlier on, if you listen to the President's inaugural address, one of the sectors that he mentioned categorically is the railway sector. The railway sector in Ghana has been in a very deplorable state, over several years, more than 50 years. You recollect the railway sector in Ghana used to be one of the strongest industry when you talk of Ghana Railway Workers Union at that time. The railway sector is key because, number one, it generates a lot of employment. Number two, it opens up new areas for development. And number three, it's a partial index of a faster trigger of economic growth in terms of GDP. In any emerging country that introduces rail lines into their sector, the rate in terms of sequential jump in GDP is astronomical, and that's an evidence for everybody to see. So I think that a divergence from the road sector to a railway sector, in the view of the President, is to trigger our economic growth, expand the economy, and make sure that Ghana is prepared. Again, if you look at the World Bank's recommendations for countries that want to trade together, one of their major recommendations is to allow intercontinental trade among those countries. If the intercontinental trade is going to work effectively, then of course we need the rail, as a means of transport. Cheaper cost of transportation and faster arrival at destination. This again will lower the cost of our products at the consumer end. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. The chairman allows for 3 questions and 2 follow-ups. So the second question, what was the reason for the termination of the GCGCP contract? What was the reason in the letter that you showed us here in this committee? What was the reason for the termination?
The Power Ministry at that time, before 2016, commenced a process of rationalization of the energy sector, which of course was a very wonderful idea to see how the energy sector will be well planned so that we do not have more power in terms of generations of more additional powers. So that process continued into 2017, to look at those powers that are coming up, the new IPPs that are coming up. In the recommendations from the AG office, a number of them has been lifted. Mr. Chairman, I had a report here with me stating the various power plants and what should be done by them as a recommendation from the AG. The AG prioritized a lot of the power plants because at that time, some of them were supposed to come into commercial operations by the year 2019, 2020. So these power plants were prioritized into various sectors. Those that need to be cancelled, those that need to be shifted, and those that can wait after the time that the country would need power. GCGP as a power plant, under the analysis and report from the Attorney General's office, of course, was classified under those power plants that need to be terminated. They were classified basically because there were certain conditions precedent they were expected to meet at the time of construction. For instance, they've not been granted permits. Ghana government was expected to undertake some rules, works that, of course, the government had not done and waiting for it to be done. The company itself was expected, for instance, under Section 4G of the agreement, provides the buyer the necessary means to start the construction of the physical infrastructure. So all these things were done ahead without meeting some of the necessary conditions that were precedent to trigger the construction.
Chairman, can we request that the nominee either gives us details or he assures us that he would forward same copy for our purposes, because we need the categorization, those to be cancelled, those to be suspended, those on this. We need it. Because as he's reading, he's not giving us the details in respect of any entity, what were they supposed to do, what is the condition precedent. So, but he's read something from the Attorney General. We need the date, and do submit a copy to Chairman through the clerk for our purposes. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I have the details of the report here, which I can tender to the committee for perusal.
Later. Maybe you will still be asked questions for which you need it, so after that.
Should I go through?
Yes, are you done? You're done, right. Honorable Member for Utu Senior, is that right? Gisela. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Honorable nominee, you are on record to have called ex-President Mahama a con man who failed to salvage the mining sector from the deteriorating activities of illegal miners in the country. What has Mahama been able to do? Are you a con man?
Mr. Chairman, no, I am not.
Yes, I'm listening, Honorable.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, yes, I am not a conman, and yes, Mr. Chairman, it's on record that I've used that word. It was in reaction to a statement I issued when I was a land minister in Kumasi. And the implications and the dictates of that word was in context with the time I was issuing out the statement. The conman in quotation, it's not directly in reference to what the descriptions might have been. But if of course, the Honorable House.
For the benefit of hindsight, was that an appropriate word to use?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
So, yes or no, was that an appropriate word to use?
Chairman, was not appropriate word to use at the time. That's exactly what I'm saying, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So...
No, hold it there, Chairman. Do you want to retract with regret, since you don't want the same word used on you as con man? You do unto Caesar.
Mr. Chairman, in that context, I withdraw that word. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, it's surprising how it has taken him that long to realize that you must respect the office of the president, and it has taken you that long to withdraw. The same manner on the night of the 6th, you said you're going to kill all of us here. That is one statement. This is the second. What do we expect as a third? Thank you.
No. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. These are learning stages, and I don't expect the third to come.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, but he's 53 years old. I don't know when he'll now learn. Honorable nominee, what are you going to do about encroachment of railway lands? Encroachment of railway lands. The reservations of railway lands have all been encroached. I'm not sure, especially in the urban areas, where slum settlements have developed, makeshift kiosks and so on and so forth, and there's a lot of safety issues with children crisscrossing the railway lines and so on and so forth. What active and proactive measures are you going to be able to take, such that if in your 4 years of being a railway minister, you're able to achieve substantial development in the sector, at least the communities that live around these areas will be safeguarded and their lives will not be in danger. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I think it's a problem within us as a country. As Ghanaians, I think it's time we change our attitude. The encroachment, it's a very serious problem within the railway industry. Most of the lines currently, as rightly pointed out, have been encroached. Some of the lines that the right-of-way had been paid for, in the colonial days, people had even taken over. Some of the areas have been given to other people to build their houses. What we need to do now, Mr. Chairman, if we go ahead to demolish some of those houses, the cost implications are quite very dense. And so what the ministry is doing currently is to begin to engage chiefs and other areas along our railway lines to acquire new routes, because we believe the acquisition of the new routes will, of course, be cheaper, than coming in to destroy some of these already built houses. And that is why in my earlier submission, I did state that the acquisition of the new route, which of course is a cost, and most often very difficult for government to buy in, we will now begin to make the acquisition as an index or as an element within the project cost. So whilst we are building our unit rate, we will also build in the right-of-way of acquisition as a cost, so that it becomes very easier for us to acquire those routes. When we acquire the route, what we need to do is to protect them. Because going forward, you will acquire new right-of-way, and the future difficulty is that they may be encroached upon. But as a country, I think we need to protect them through a lot of engagement, stakeholder engagement, talking to the communities along the railway lines, and by doing so, we hope that the encroachment will cease in the near future. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, John.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Congratulations to the Honorable nominee. The former Minister for Railways, Honorable Joe Gatti, in 2017, after a meeting with railway workers in Kumasi area, announced the Railway Ministry intends to build a major cargo terminal in Ejuso. Considering the fact that work has started, or almost about starting, on the Buankra Inland Port, will you take steps to ensure that the Eastern Railway line from Tema to Kumasi is extended to pass through the inland port at Buankra?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, Mr. Chairman, we will take steps to do that. One of the reasons for the inland ports, as you rightly put it up, is to harbor goods that will be transported from the southern end to the middle belt and then to the northern sector. And so it is important that the rail transportation, terminate or pass through that end, so that some of the cargoes, of course, will have a place of lodging. So yes, Mr. Chairman, that is one of the lines that I'm going to put much attention when I assume, if this House gives me the nod as the Sector Minister. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The late CEO of the Railway Authority, Richard Dombo, may his soul rest in perfect peace, in February 2020 announced that the feasibility studies on the Accra Sky Line, the Accra Sky Train project, has been completed. Can you tell us more about this project and when work will commence? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, let me also use this opportunity once again to extend my condolences to the bereaved family of Richard, which passed away some few days ago as the Chief Executive of the Development Authority. In fact, Mr. Chairman, Richard would have been sitting behind me here today. He did indicate to me when he left the hospital that he was coming to support me. I want to say, use this opportunity and extend my condolences to the bereaved family. That project, Mr. Chairman, it's a very important project. Construction work, of course, has not started on that line. The ministry has done through aggressive methods to procure feasibility studies as to how the work will be done. Mr. Chairman, I have not yet gotten to the office, and so I'm unable to give this House any assurance of the date of completion of that project. But what I can assure the House, if given the nod, is that I'll put in every measure to make sure that we continue to build on the work of my predecessor. Mr. Chairman, I also acknowledge that my predecessor and the team at the Railway Ministry have done quite a marvelous job. They have laid a foundation for this country railway, and I'm extremely proud of what they have done. Jogate and the other two deputies have done marvelously for this country. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Honorable Singh.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Honorable nominee, when you were Minister of Lands, the President declared, if I'm permitted to use the word, war against Galamsey. You were tasked to lead the charge. A number of interventions took place, including the seizure of excavators. It was also promised that some drones will be purchased. You put the figure $30 million worth. Later, the Interministerial Committee chair indicated $500,000 was what was paid. I just want to find out from you, also because Mr. Eko Ewusi, later in a caution statement to the CID, indicated that a number of the excavators were taken by you, or you sent people to take those excavators. How many excavators did you seize as minister, and what happened to them, if you know?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, first of all, let me put it on record that while I was the Minister for Lands and Natural Resources, I have not seized any excavator. What I did when I was a minister was to ask for withdrawals of excavators from mining sites. And at that period, about 500 excavators were withdrawn from the mining sites, but they were not seized. Because the methodology to seize excavators, it's a process through the AG's office. The minister unilaterally cannot seize excavators. So my order was for withdrawal of excavators from the mining site. And I did remember that that withdrawal date has been extended for another 3 months because at that point in time, we realized that excavators, though withdrawn from the mining site, some were still close to the various sites. So we asked that they should be moved further, because what was happening at that time, which we note very well, was that most of these excavators were not owned by the miners. The excavators were owned by the separate entity. And so we were going to detach the mining of excavators from the owners of the licenses, so that the licenses would have a license to mine, the licensee would have a license to mine, but the excavator who needs to come and work on the excavation site will also be licensed, so that we have two processes. So these were some of the processes that we put in place to undertake. Yes, of course, the Interministerial Committee, which came to handle the situation, was a good innovations by His Excellency, the President. I did say that we are going to procure a number of drones at the cost of 30 billion cedis. These drones are high-tech drones. They are not the normal drones that we see flying, in Accra. And we did remember that when we engaged one of the dealers in the drone from the United States of America, the price they gave us at that time was 30 million for the number of drones. I think we were going to acquire about 5 drones at that time. Unfortunately, we were not able to acquire the drones, but the processes to address the Galamsey menace have been transferred to the Interministerial Committee, which therefore took over from me whilst I was in office. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Chairman.
What, you want to follow up?
Mr. Chairman, I'm grateful. Honorable nominee, follow up to what the question by the honorable member. When people say that 500 excavators were seized and vanished into thin air, you have spoken to these excavators purported to have been seized and and lost. What would be your reaction to those who say that they were seized and then they vanished?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I personally have also been tagged as taking, I think, 20 excavators or so, but of course, which is not true. I did state that I ordered for the withdrawal of excavators from the site. But after the Interministerial Committee, of course, which I am a member, I was a member, some excavators were seized. As to whether they vanished or not, I don't think that is the issue. The excavators that were seized went through the process of seizing the excavators, and they've all been under the auspices of the chairman of the Ministerial Committee. And this has been transported, some of them have been transported to Accra. I don't know, and I have no idea as a fact to tell this committee that a number of them has gone missing. I haven't got that record. And it's not known to me that any of those excavators have gone missing.
Mr. Chairman, just a follow-up. The 20 you have been accused of also interfering with, you say it is not true. How do you then address this allegation that is in a cautioned police statement by ECOWC?
Well, Mr. Chairman, because the gentleman who was supposed to have made a statement, came out to deny it. It was just something somebody put on the social media, and other people speak it across this country. So ECO is on record to have stated categorically that nowhere he did mention that I, John Peter Amewu, took 20 excavators from the 500 or so, or 200, whatever number excavators that were seized. Nowhere. So he came out to deny that assertion. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, as a reporter, I recalled in 2008 when Ghana experienced DUMSO, a number of interventions, including the importation of some gen sets, were deployed to solve the problem of DUMSO. It was not to be permanently resolved, and so we had DUMSO again under President Mahama. A number of interventions were taken. Those interventions led to heavy criticisms, such as interventions such as the purchase of the car power, Amewu, and other such interventions. The former president and the NDC were lambasted. Given your experience at the Energy Ministry and the fact, which I know, that car power has become one of the most reliable source of power, and the Amewu deal that had to be renegotiated because of its relevance to the power sector, will you say that some of these criticisms were misplaced?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, yes, of course, it's on record today that one of our dependable source of power from the combined cycle turbine is the car power, which is driving into the grid an equivalent of 450 megawatts, on the daily basis, as of when availability is declared. At the time that the issue of whether car power was needed or not was very high in the agenda, the discussions were mainly on the cost of acquisition of the power plant. And so at that time, the capacity charges were, of course, far in excess of what the opposition at that time thought it might be. And so I would say that the thinking at that time was, of course, misplaced, but it was rather to send a signal about the cost of acquisition. You also remember one of the issues raised at that time strongly was the fact that there would be a need for competition at generation, because most of those emergency plans that were acquired went through the process of negotiation. And the understanding that time was the fact that by negotiation, we may not be getting value in terms of the tariff rate for the consumers if it had gone through competition, and the price will come down to the consumers at a very low rate. So it was based on that framework that on assumption of office, we took in measures to make sure that we renegotiated some of those tariffs. And Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to announce to you, as I speak, that car power's rate, for instance, have been renegotiated in terms of the tariff, and an amount quite close to about 25% in terms of what it was has been reduced down from the capacity charges. And of course, this was even the main reason why in the our last adjustment of the utility bills by the PRC, we didn't see that upgrade in terms of increase in the tariff because of the capacity that car power, of course, was generating into the grid. So yes, car power is one of our major plans. Yes, of course, the rate at that time was high. And yes, today we've been able to negotiate the rate about 25% less than what it was.
But just a quick follow-up on that also. Wouldn't you say the times have also influenced the rates, given the fact that Ghana was in need at the time that the deal was made? And of course, if you are out of the need, you may have an advantage on the negotiation table.
Yes, of course. At the time the decision was taken, it was taken within a short period, and that is why they were classified as emergency power plants, because they were to come in and address emergency issues, which is good. But that doesn't take the responsibility of looking at what the cost was expected to be. The cost could be looked at it from different perspectives. At that time, we thought that the cost in terms of the capacity charge was a bit higher than expected. So time could have changed, as you rightly put it, because at the time car power was brought in, it was expected to feed, for instance, on heavy fuel in Tema. Today, car power is no longer feeding on heavy fuel. Car power is now feeding on gas, because most of our gas is stranded, in the western side, when there's a stranded gas, and it's, of course, cheaper than heavy fuel. So car power now has been moved, for instance, to the western side. So yes, circumstances, of course, have changed, and today car power is in quite a comfortable position.
Yes, so thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the reduced charges may just be as a result of the fact that we are no longer in an emergency situation, and again, because it's no longer using heavy fuel, which is more expensive than the gas that it uses. But I'll move on to my next question. Article 47 of the Constitution, 1992 Constitution, says 47.1, Ghana shall be divided into as many constituencies for the purpose of election of members of Parliament as the Electoral Commission may prescribe, and each constituency shall be represented by one member of Parliament. You represent the Hohoi constituency. However, the people in that part of Ghana without a representation in Parliament. I refer here to SAL. I'm sure you are aware of those concerns that have been raised by the people of SAL. Some have attributed their state to possible gerrymandering that may have taken place before the elections. Did you, in any way, influence the state of affairs that denied them a representation as we speak? If yes, how? And if no, how do you feel about their situation, though?
Honourable Member, is any part of that matter pending? Is any part of that matter pending in court? Are you aware that any part of the matter related?
Yes, I'm aware that some part of that matter is in court. Yes, some part of it.
Okay, so Honourable, let me guide you. 93, is that right?
Yeah, Order 93.
Order 93. Reference shall not be made on to any matter on which judicial decision is pending in such a way as may, in the opinion of the Speaker, prejudice the interest to the parties. So I'll be watching what answer you give. If in any way I think you prejudice the parties, I will curtail it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I sympathize with my brothers and sisters from the South for not taking the parliamentary voting process. Of course, I have brothers and sisters from there. Mr. Chairman, I went into this race as a player, but not as a referee. I do not constitute the rules that were in place for me to come and contest. I just went in as a contestant. And unfortunately, for one reason, they were not allowed to vote in Howell. Mr. Chairman, that's beyond me, but I sympathize with them. And of course, I would have been very happy if the people of SAL voted, because in 2004 and 2008, those were my strong areas when I contested as a candidate. And so if they had voted, I strongly believe that even the margin made in Howell would quite be higher. I sympathize with them. I only pray that the agencies that be taking measures quickly to address the problem, to enable them to take part in their voting process. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Yes, Honorable.
Thank you, Minister. Congratulations. Minister, the Court of Appeal on Monday, 22nd, gave a ruling in a matter of consolidated civil motion between Springfield and then, let me shorten it for you, Springfield Energy, Springfield Exploration and Production Limited versus ENI and Vitol Upstream. This issue arose in court as a result of a letter dated the 9th of April 2020, which you directed the parties to go into what you term unitization of the oil fields that they were exploring, hydrocarbons. And this letter that you wrote was subsequently suspended by another letter dated the 29th July 2020, signed by your Chief Director for and on behalf of the Minister. Can you allay the fears of Ghanaians of any possible legal issues that may take us to the Court of Arbitration? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, yes, of course, I authorized the unitization of the ENI and the Springfield block. Mr. Chairman, unitization is a common process within the industry where in the estimations and technical report evaluation indicated that there is a possible communication or movement of petroleum in situ between two blocks. And for the purpose of maximum and efficient extraction, it's important that the two blocks come together and exploit the resources in a common way so as not to lose the reservoir pressure when two people are working within the same block. So it is on that mandate and that framework of our legislative drive that I issued the letter. The letter, Mr. Chairman, is issued in accordance with a technical report that I have here, which I can also tender in between ENI and the parties. Yes, of course, it's on record that...
Chairman, Mr. Nominee, technical report from where?
From GMPC.
Thank you.
Report.
So say so.
An independent technical evaluation.
And then, Chairman, follow up. ENI and Springfield, are they all Ghanaian entities? Just a small follow-up.
Mr. Chairman, Springfield is a solely Ghanaian entity. The first...
And ENI?
ENI, it's not... Of course, the company is incorporated in Ghana.
So, Chairman, for the purpose of our record, describe the blocks that you are seeking this, the technical term, unitization, yes. So just give us the details for the purpose of our record. Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Chairman, it's a channel and hydrocarbon accumulation across WCTP Block 2 and OCTP Block. So these are the two blocks in contention for the call for the Minister for Unitization.
Did you authorize the letter the Chief Director signed of 29th July 2020? Were you in the know of it?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chair.
You were in the process of giving an explanation to the...
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Chairman, this process is a common process, and it was based on this technical report from GMPC that we issued that directive for ENI to comply. Mr. Chairman, ENI was not satisfied with the directive, and we held a number of meetings. Mr. Chairman, we put in place a three-member technical committee to evaluate the data further. Upon further examination of the data, we issue another instruction to the ENI. the other party, which is Springfield, felt that ENI was not promptly complying with the minister's directive and therefore went to court. Mr. Chairman, as I speak now, I think the case is currently before the Court of Appeal, and I don't think it will be good for me to comment further on that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman, it's appreciated, but is that to suggest that Springfield were unhappy with your decisions?
Not at all. Springfield was unhappy because ENI refused to comply with the ministerial directive.
Were you not interfering with their contractual mandate that you had so granted them in an earlier agreement?
No, Mr. Chairman, ENI brought out the fact of stabilization clauses, and those were some of the discussions that we held behind closed doors. But stabilization clauses cannot, of course, avoid a call for unitization. A call for unitization is a maximum efficiency of extraction of oil.
Chairman, just clarify, is Springfield asking for respect, ENI to respect your directive, or they are in court for other purposes which may include judgment debt?
Mr. Chairman, ENI went to court to ask, Springfield went to court to ask ENI to comply with the ministerial directive. That was the case, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Honorable nominee, I have with me the report of the Committee on Roads and Transport on the commercial contract agreement between the government of the Republic of Ghana, represented by the Ministry of Railway Development, Ghana Rail Authority, and Amandi Investment Limited for an amount of 500 million euros for the construction of sections of the Western Railway line on standard gauge from Takoradi Port to Huni Valley. I'm sure you're aware of this arrangement.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'm aware of that contract.
This House gave the approval to that request, and it details the scope of work that Amandi is supposed to perform. Can you apprise us on this contract or arrangement between Government of Ghana, per your brief? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I think the contract came to Parliament for ratification. The loan agreement had been also placed before the House. Currently, the contractor, Amandi, is at the stage of mobilization, but the terms, in terms of the financial elements within the loan, have been subjected to further cleaning at the Ministry of Finance. Mr. Chairman, as I speak now, ENI is waiting for clearance from the Debt Management Unit and Ministry of Finance, and they will proceed to site to commence construction. That line is very key for us as a country on the Western Line, and Amandi, as a contractor, is ready to move to site immediately. Clearance in terms of availability of funds for construction have been concluded. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, this brings me to my last question, which was sent to me by my constituent called Adobuafu of Abekala Pass Police Post. He wants me to ask you what you are going to do about their salary structure. He works with the Railway Authority, says there are casual workers who are paid 700 Ghana cedis a month, and he feels those within that bracket are not being treated. So I should bring it to your knowledge and ask you what you'll be doing to resolve those challenges. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I sympathize with your constituents in terms of the size of their salary. Mr. Chairman, productivity must reflect whatever you take home. Unfortunately, the railway industry, as I stated earlier on, is at the verge of collapse, especially the railway company. Normally, most of their internal generated revenues are derived from some of this tariff they got from transportation and haulage of some of our minerals products. Unfortunately, all those facilities currently are not available, even because of the COVID. There's a ban on transportation of passengers. When I assume office, we have to speed up the process of completion of most of these roles, where activities will be brought, online. When those activities come online, and then we begin to generate revenue, then we can begin to look at their salaries. As it is now, if nothing is being done, of course, there is no way we can just manufacture money from the air and begin to pay them. We must look at what they do. And so we will try to revamp the industry. That's why government is putting attention in revamp of the railway sector. If that is done and done properly, I think that their salaries will commensurate the activities that will emerge from the revamping exercise. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes. Yes, Honorable Ajay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Honorable nominee, in Ghana currently, there is an ineffective railway legal and regulatory regime, because as we speak right now, there is no regulation for Railway Act 2008, Act 779. What do you intend doing if you are given the nod?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Of course, regulations are important to drive the law, and they give bare understanding of the framework of the law. And so in every area or sector that we lack regulations, you will see a lot of gaps in terms of implementation. If this House gives me the nod, Mr. Chairman, I will speed up on coming out with the regulation, because the law mandates the minister to do so. I'll come out with the necessary regulation to make sure that the sector becomes very viable. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
What are two key things that you want to do when you are given the nod? Two key policy decisions that you take to improve the railway sector if you are given them.
Mr. Chairman, one key thing I need to look at quickly when this House gives me the nod is to begin to look at the role of the GRDA, which is the Ghana Railway Development Authority. Currently, the Act spells out their role as the asset owner and as a regulator. It is important, as we all know, that you cannot be a player and at the same time a referee in the same game. If we really expect a future expansion of the industry where the anticipations is for private sector to lead the growth in the future, in the long run, then it's important that we must detach the asset ownership from the regulator. So coming out with an independent regulator to regulate the framework of the railway construction and operation, it's something that I will look at quickly. The other thing that I also have to look at is the intercontinental transportation system through rail, which is, of course, also very important. For instance, the rail line going from Tema through Mpakadan, to Burkina Faso. Of course, that passes through my constituency, Howe, and part of it goes through Honorable Okujoto's constituency also. So those lines, of course, we will concentrate on it and make sure that we drive it down to the northern territory of this country, and make sure that we link the two countries,
Chairman,
together.
northern territory is too broad. Where do you want to extend the railway to? When you say northern territory, I can go from Waya through Bolga, through Hamley, through Nabrongo, coming towards Savrugo or Diale. Where are you exactly referring to? Or even Gushegu, if it has to pass through Yendi or Bimbla or Napayile? Be specific.
Mr. Chairman, that line terminates at Tamale and then continue from Tamale through Bolkatanga down to Ouagadougou in the northern part.
Tamale is appreciated. In your answer to the Honorable Ejari, are we expecting you leading reforms that separate asset ownership from regulation when you become minister? When do you intend to take this initiative if you do become minister? Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Chairman, this will be taken within my first 6 months in office if the House gives me the nod. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Last, which is a statement. I read this on page 7 of the handing over notes from your ministry. I hope that we will not read the same thing as what you want to do, that GRDA does not want to be a judge in its own course, and that you really meet your 6-month deadline to make sure that it's really separated. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'll do so. Thank you.
Yes. Very well. Honorable Zuzu.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Honorable nominee, I have two questions. The first one borders on a promise you made to the people of Lower Manya when the very unfortunate incident of police brutality and shootout occurred. You recall that you led a team to the community and promised that you were going to investigate the incident and make sure that the perpetrators were brought to book. We had some fatality, people dying, others had their parts amputated, and so on and so forth. What is the state, or what is the status of that investigation, if you have done so?
Mr. Chairman, yes, it's on record that I led a team to the scene and did promise that we would investigate the matter. Mr. Chairman, we put in a committee to begin the investigation at the time. But what happened was that the case went to the police, to look into. So our committee then, therefore, slacked behind in terms of the investigation. And we actually have not completed the investigation. It's on record, we have not completed the investigation because we have relegated that duty to the police when we were told later that the police were on top of the issue.
But being a minister in charge of that sector at the time, are you willing to follow up so you know the status of that investigation, particularly because lives were lost and there are many who were injured and we need to bring that matter to a closure?
Mr. Chairman, yes, I'll provide this advice to the new sector minister coming in if he's giving the nod. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The second question borders on the light rail transit system. What is the current status of the integrated light rail transit system?
As I stated earlier on, some feasibility works have been done, but no much details, in fact, have been done beyond that light rail system. But that area includes both some of the network within Accra and then Kumasi. So feasibility studies are currently ongoing.
What measures would you put in place to ensure that we achieve this? Because this was part of the 2016 manifesto promise of the MPP, and we would expect that after 4 years it would have been achieved. But since you are now going to that ministry, what kind of assurances can you give the people of Ghana that we are going to see, is going to see the light of day very soon?
Mr. Chairman, if this House gives me the nod, taking into consideration the difficulty we have in terms of our internal transportation system, that will be a key area to look at to speed up, the commencement of that project, because that will also, free our roads, and the traffic density that we witness along our roads, of course, will be reduced. So it's something that I will do very quickly. I'll commence the process. Again, the difficulty, as we all know, has to do with availability of funds. But notwithstanding that, I'll promise the House that it's something I'll look on quickly when this House gives me the nod and when I get to the office. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Honorable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Railway construction projects are capital intensive, and many of the figures bandied around are between 500 million, a billion, and upwards. We all know that COVID has also affected the global economy and the Ghanaian economy as well. As you move to the Railways Ministry, if confirmed, how are you going to raise funding to undertake the project of reconstructing our railway sector?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, of course, railway is very capital extensive. A kilometer of railway runs between $6 to $7 million, far in excess of what the road sector currently witness. In the midst of this COVID, global fund, it's very limited. But Mr. Chairman, I'm praying that now that we've got a vaccine, we will begin to see the reductions of the COVID and the world will gradually begin to move in its normal way. We would proceed with looking for funding, no matter the difficulty, because our capital within the country itself, in terms of the resources, are very limited, and therefore it's going to be difficult to rely on government funding of railway projects. So we'll explore other avenues. I appreciate your concern, about the difficulty of global fund. Notwithstanding that, we'll still explore the avenue to see how we can attract that. The second one is, as I think I've stated it earlier, the government must also make efforts to continue to look at the railway sector as a social product, just as we do, for the roads. If we put that attention, which of course I know His Excellency Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo will do, if you listen carefully to his inaugural address, with the attention that he wants to put on the railway sector, then parallel along external funding and domestic funding, we should be able to speed up most of this construction and put it in a state that Ghanaians will benefit. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Now, as you continue to expand railway infrastructure in this country, can you give this committee an assurance that all new rail construction will be provided with ducts? As you do the excavation, you put pipes alongside it where fiber and even electricity cables can also be laid alongside the tracks to extend that infrastructure to the other parts of the country and prolong the lifespan of the infrastructure we're putting in place. When people are constructing roads, they construct the roads without reference to development. So, a few years down the line, other contractors come along the line, dig across the roads to lay pipes. If they provided ducts alongside the roads and the railways infrastructure, it would just be a means of passing those pipes along those channels. So, going forward, are you going to assure this committee that you would mandate that all new construction of railway infrastructure would have pipes laid alongside it to facilitate, would have ducts for fiber and electrical and other cables laid alongside it to prolong the lifespan and make it easier for us to extend these complementary infrastructure to the rest of the country?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, infrastructure development under normal circumstances should not be looked at as a unilateral development. We should consider it complementary, jointly, with other sectors that it's, of course, very important. And if you look at how these things are done all over the world, ministries are always in collaboration to know where they fit in terms of the infrastructure development. So I think your suggestion is well noted. Of course, going forward, we should begin to do this jointly, where rail lines will be constructed without putting in the necessary ducts that will mandate, for instance, the communication ministry to do other activities, water to do its activities, electricity service to undertake its activities. So I think this combination in terms of looking at which other sectors fit into the construction to advance, on that proponent, of course, is something that we will look at. Of course, we are colleagues that are going to sit in cabinet together, and I'm going to consult you from time to time when this project, sorry if I'm giving the nod, we'll be sitting together to discuss some of these issues. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, please.
Now, Accra Energy appears to have stoked quite a bit of controversy. And there have been a lot of calls, even this past week, that the contract be renegotiated because some people think that it is not in the interest of the country.
was the Accra Energy contract good for Ghana or not? And or are there aspects of it that can be improved that you'd recommend to your successor in office?
The renegotiation of the Accra contract, I think, was done with good faith. It came to this house, the house gave us the nod, and it was done with an intention that in the long run, Ghana will really benefit. In terms of the legislative aspect of the contract, we have not done anything that is quite different from what the contract states specifically. What the contractor seeks to do is, because of the stabilization clause that were in the contract at the time it was signed, the contractor insists that coming into effect of the new EMP law, we should take him out of the new EMP law and make sure that we include clauses in that contract to make sure that anybody who reads that contract can read outright that this contract is not subjected to the terms and conditions in the new EMP. That was what we did with the Accra contract, and we came to the Parliament here for necessary approval. I think that it was also done with anticipation that while the contractor is still on site doing its development, the mandate also exists for him, again, to undertake exploratory activities. These are, again, clauses that we have picked from the new one because it was not in the old one. Where stabilization provisions exist in contract, Mr. Chairman, what it does is that it gives the developer the mandate to do choose and pick, of course, because he would, of course, be eliminated from the new one that is coming in. But where we as a country find out that there is something new that we can impose on him, we would do that. And that is why we mandated the contractor that he can still go ahead to do exploration even though he's doing a development, which we think is good. We did that for the purpose that we can increase our reserve to production ratio. Mr. Chairman, today, most of our reserves are drying very fast, and new wells have not been replaced. In the oil and gas sector, what is important is to look at your reserve replacement ratio, because these resources are not, they are finite, they are not infinite. And so as you take it, you need to add more. So by doing this, we expect that we'll be adding more reserves to the existing reserve to increase our production. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Now, how much exactly is the energy sector debt? And how much did the free electricity for COVID extended by government to the citizens cost the exchequer?
The energy sector debt stands at about $1.5 billion US from a figure of about $2.7 billion. I've stated earlier on that the Ministry of Finance has already cleared all the debts, it owes ECG. So the debt today, it's about $1.5 billion through reconciliation. And I think that's a very good effort by this government. The electricity relief, which we call the COVID relief that His Excellency Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo introduced, basically was to address the suffering of Ghanaians during the peak period of the COVID. A total of quite close to about 1 billion Ghana cedis was paid. And these have been segmented between ECG, VRA, and then NETCO. Mr. Chairman, I have details of the payment which I can tender to this committee. The total payment to date is about $1 billion US. Citi, sorry. For instance, the ECG customer populations and revenue causes a total of almost about, as at the end of April, May, June 2020, we have about 731 million Ghana cedis. That from NETCO total up to 140 million Ghana cedis, and that of VRA total up to 166 million Ghana cedis. Mr. Chairman, you recollect that His Excellency had again extended it for 3 months. That 3 months addition, of course, is not here, but it also ends up approximately about another 200 million cedis. So if you add the 200 million cedis to the 1.15 that we're talking about, it will be in the range of about 1.3 billion Ghana cedis as a cumulative relief for Ghanaians.
Thank you. Honorable Aya.
Thank you very much. I think I'll just take it from there. Honorable nominee, you just spoke about government payment of debt from public agencies, MMDAs, assemblies to electricity company. Now, I don't know if you have cited this comparative analysis of electricity tariffs in ECOWAS member countries, sponsored by the ECOWAS Regional Electricity Regulatory Authority and the African Development Bank, 2019. They did some studies on comparative tariffs for West African countries, all 15 of them. And they mentioned, they gave 2018 data because it's a 2019 study. And generation cost was 55%. Transmission cost was 6%. Distribution cost was 39%. It was the highest in the sub-region, the distribution cost. And the transmission loss for Ghana was 4.4%. Nigeria was 8.4%, and then, Benin was 5.4%. I'm just giving you some two other countries just so that you can contextualize it. Now, you talk about the problem of the sector being inefficiency in distribution. Within the period that you were there, what did you do to address the inefficiency in distribution? Because I don't think that we should be happy that we've paid the bills, because if we are paying inefficient prices, it means we're just throwing good money after bad money. So what's your position on that? What did you do, and then what do you think should be done?
Thank you. We did two major things to address the costs within the system. As you rightly put it, the 39% for the distribution was extremely very high. And this 39%, again, was as a result of the losses that we have. The distribution losses in Ghana, it's in the range of about 25 to 30% sometimes, which is very high. What that means is that about 25% of our power that we produce had not been consumed, but they've been paid for. They vanish somewhere along the line, either through the distribution system, because, as I stated earlier, most of the equipment that we have are obsolete, or they vanish as a result of the power theft at the supply end, where people get the power and they've not been able to capture it for payment processes. What we did was an injection of about $100 million by His Excellency Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo into ECG to make sure that all obsolete equipment.
By the government of Ghana or by Nana?
By government of Ghana. By government of Ghana.
I thought maybe he made some donation to ECG.
There was no. Well, the ECG valued the obsolete equipment that we have, because most of this equipment were the cause of the losses. And it was in the range of $100 million, which His Excellency directs that we should take steps to replace those equipment. And as I speak now, it came to Cabinet, Cabinet gave the approval, and the work had begun in those areas. Intensively, they are in Ashanti region and in the Greater Accra region. You may begin to experience some flexibility, in your lighting system. This is as a result of some of this replacement of the obsolete equipment that is undertaken. So that is one thing that we've done. The other thing that we did, which have to buy into the 65% that you talk about, the generation, it's also to renegotiate some of the capacity charges, because generation of 65% is extremely high. So these two things that we have done, the renegotiation of the capacity charges and injecting more newer and brighter equipment into the distribution end, helps us to address the system as we go forward. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
What percentage decrease in tariff should consumers expect by the time you complete these two exercises?
It will reflect definitely on the consumer tariff. Mr. Chairman, it's also on record to note that the tariff that consumers enjoy today here, it's still less than the tariff they consumed in about 5-6 years back. So the further reductions or making sure that these costs are taken out, of course, is going to reduce the tariffs further. As I stated, for instance, migrating of car power from heavy fuel to gas, for instance, alone, was the major cause of just an increment of 7% in tariff that we witnessed in 2020. Tariffs were going to go up as high as 35% according to the PRC prediction. But because of that movement alone, that reduction, of course, comes down to benefit the consumers. I would expect not less than 10 to 15% if we are able to address the system to see some benefits in terms of the tariff. The tariff system as it exists now needs to be very flexible in terms of the adjustment. The automatic price adjustment formula has not often been triggered, and what happened is the accumulation of that ended up raising the tariff anytime PLC would want to increase it. So frequent adjustments in terms of triggering the automatic adjustments, it's also very important so that at any particular point in time, we should know where we are, especially as you see today, prices of petroleum products are currently climbing because we are getting gradually out of the COVID relief. So we should be seeing some little incremental increase in some of these products as we move forward.
In 20% per capita access to electricity in Ghana, and it was the highest in the entire sub-region after Cape Verde. And you can understand Cape Verde is a very small country, and they use a lot of renewable energy sources. 2020, what is the per capita access to electricity now? What's your data? And add that to Keta exploration and Saltpond, what's happened to those two exploration activities?
Your first question was I didn't get one clear.
The first point was the per capita access to electricity in Ghana today. 2017, it was 79% per capita access to electricity.
Yeah.
The next highest country in West Africa was Cape Verde, which had 92% per capita access to electricity. So I'm asking you, at the time you were leaving office, what was the per capita access to electricity in Ghana? And then take on board a question on Keta exploration, which I know started. What's the status of the Keta exploration?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The access rate at the time I was leaving office at about 85%, which is, of course, one of the highest within the region. I mean, coming very close after South Africa. Ghana has done very well in terms of its penetration of access to electricity. With the Keta exploration, it's about 85%, 84.7, getting to about 85%. Yeah. But the policy of government was to move it up to 90%. And this House will recollect the number of 10 key projects that we brought into the House. It is expected that when the construction began in most of those communities, the access rate will be moved to quite close to 90%. The delay in commencement of those projects, I think it's something that everybody knows. Because of the COVID, we have delayed the implementation of those projects. But I'm sure that as we get out of the COVID, most of those contractors will return back to site to speed up the construction, and this will increase the access rate. The Keta exploration project, temporarily, it's at halt. Again, basically because of the injection of capital from the IOCs. But what government has done is to intensify the online exploration, which extended up to the north. GMPC has done quite a very intensive work. The 2Ds have been completed. The areas have been closed up for further 3D exercise. The GMPC report proves that the areas are looking very, very good. And so we have increased activities in terms of exploration on the onshore, but we have minimized activities on the offshore in terms of the Keta Basin itself.
My last question, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, you have had three.
No, this is my last question.
You have had three.
Pardon?
You have had three already. In fact,
No,
more than three.
just ask one and then a baby. Carry on.
I'll take the last one.
That has to do with small-scale mining. The nominee who just left before you came try to defend government record in terms of fighting Galamsey. You were there. The general perception out there is that you performed abysmally in fighting Galamsey. There was a temporary halt, you seized equipment and etc. But as we speak today, I mean, there's a lot of Galamsey activity going on across the country. Can you explain really what is the problem of Galamsey? And with the benefit of hindsight, now that you are leaving the ministry, what would you recommend should be done differently? Take into consideration the activities of Minerals Commission, the role of district assemblies, the role of chiefs, the role of security agencies on the grounds, and all the citizens. What do you think should be done differently?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The issue of Galamsey in Ghana is not quite different from what we see even in the mature provinces. When the gold rush, for instance, happened in the United States of America, I think it was more than what we see currently in Ghana. But it takes them time as a country, to build consensus and go forward to address the problem. The Galamsey problem we have in Ghana has to do more with attitude and also our behavior towards our environment. Yes, of course, this government came in with an approach to address the Galamsey problem because largely we believe that the use of the force might not necessarily be the way to address it. But as human as we are, some force would have to be introduced. So I wouldn't say that the government has failed in its attempt to address the Galamsey problem. The problem of Galamsey is an ongoing, and solution to address it must also be an ongoing. It cannot be an event. When I was the sector minister, I think we put in a lot of measures, and those measures, again, find its way into the Interministerial Committee, of Environment that we try to resolve. There were some excesses, of course, in a human environment. You must expect that. But I think that my advice for the new minister is to relook at some of the regulations. I quite remember we came out with a multilateral mining integrated approach document, which had fortunately not been implemented. I would advise the new sector minister to look into that because the World Bank was prepared to buy into that. The Australian government was prepared to buy into that. Unfortunately, we couldn't launch that document at the time I left that ministry. So my advice to the incoming minister may be to advise him to go back and look into the multilateral mining integrated project document, which I think will be a way forward to address the Galamsey menace we have in the country. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Honorable nominee, congratulations for your new position. Sometime last year, somewhere around the end of September, the president was in Kumasi, specifically in my constituency, to commission a 51-kilometer long standard gauge railway line to connect Eduarden and Ashanti region. At the commissioning, I learned that the current railway development plan envisaged a complete movement away from the narrow gauge to the standard gauge. What, in your view, will be for this new policy approach to the sector, if you can enlighten us on that? Thank you.
Chairman, the new master plan, as she rightly put it, deviate from the narrow gauge to the standard gauge. There are advantages, in both ends. But the major reason why the country is moving to the standard gauge is the fact that the narrow gauge hardly has currently been undertaken by any new emerging countries, except even within our sub-region here in Africa. It's only South Africa that it seems to be using the narrow gauge. The narrow gauge, what it does is that it enables the train to be able to, meander through smaller communities. And by doing so, it travels at a lower speed because its ability to meander through narrow communities. The introduction of standard gauge, what it means is that the speed is going to be very high, in the sense that the stability in terms of what it sits on the base would also increase because of this axial load. So the standard gauge is going to increase in speed and also increase the axial load. Currently, the speed, according to the master plan, is going to move from about 120 kilometers per hour to about 160 kilometers per hour. What a standard gauge might not do is that there is a possibility that it may not be able to go through some of the communities, because the curvature in terms of the standard gauge is not as easier as if you use the narrow gauge. With the narrow gauge, because of the speed, the train will be able to move slowly and meander. With the standard gauge, it may go at a very tall speed and may not be able to meander. But what we can do again with the standard gauge approach is that we may need to acquire more right-of-way. If more right-of-way is acquired, in addition to the existing right-of-way we have, then it can take time through the design to go through those communities. So this is the reason why I think that the framers of the master plan, of course, which I think is yet to come to cabinet for approval, thought of migrating away from the narrow gauge to the standard gauge, just basically because of spare parts and other details. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. My last question. What are some of the major challenges that you envisage as a railway minister, and what measures will you introduce to minimize these challenges if approved by the committee? Thank you.
Did I get you clear? Challenges in the railway sector, you mean? Thank you, Mr. Chair. There are several challenges currently within the sector, as the House will agree with me. One of them, which is very important and key, is how to address issues of right-of-way, which has to do with the acquisition of land. That, Mr. Chairman, I mentioned earlier that we would have to henceforth begin to include the cost of right-of-way in our unit pricing, and so that we do not look at right-of-way as a separate item from the construction project, where government will have to pay for right-of-way, and contractors or IPC contractors will have to come on and also do the construction. We need to build them together so that that issue can be addressed. Another major problem we need to look into the sector again is the key personnel that are in the sector. You will agree with me that this is a new sector, it's a new ministry, and they lack personnel to work with. And so one of the things I'm going to do quickly is to talk to my colleague, the road minister, because, Mr. Chairman, there's no difference between the construction of railway line and road line. It is the same thing. There is no difference. Formation, surveys, it is the same. The way the road is constructed, that is what the same process they use for the railway line. So I will be speaking to my colleague, the road minister, to see if they can give me some of the technical persons from the Ministry of Roads or Highways to support my ministry to address some of the staff challenges that we have. Because the staff challenges is very important, and if we are able to address that, then we will begin to move forward in the right direction. Another major challenge is how do we begin to introduce local, contractors into the rail industry. As I've stated earlier, construction of the railway is not different from the roads. So some of these our road contractors, can be upgraded to come into the railway sector and construct the railway line for us. And that will make it cheaper, because today, as I speak, the cost of a railway, a kilometer, is about $6 million to $7 million, depending on the terrain. If you bring in some of these local contractors that, of course, have done several routes through difficult terrain, they should be able to address the problem. Going forward, I think that the railway industry, together with the Ministry of Lands and Natural Resources, will have to be talking to each other to see how both ministries can work very quickly. Ghana has a lot of deposits in terms of iron ore. His Excellency, the President's agenda is to see how we mineralize these resources to the benefit of the country. One of the cost-sensitive items in the railway industry has to do with the rail lines. Apart from the railway line, Mr. Chairman, 70 to 80% of all the other materials are local materials, right down from the base, the sub-base, the ballast, and all the other things. They are all local materials. The only other material that comes in is the steel. So if as a country we are able to aggressively, undertake our steel development project together with the deposit that we have, with the iron ore, we should be able to construct most of our railways line within the shortest possible time. These are some of the challenges that I think we can address as a country and move forward. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Some quick preliminaries. I noticed from the
Honorable, we have spent so much time.
The statement.
Move straight. Ignore the preliminaries and move straight to
No, for our record, Mr. Chairman, this is very important.
Our record is ours. So just go straight to the question for me, please.
Okay, I would address that in conclave because it's important. The communication from the President and his CV, the inconsistency, but I'll address that in conclave. Mr. Chairman, my first question will take me to the nominee's former role as Minister responsible for energy. On the 19th of October 2019, the Millennium Challenge Corporation terminated the PDS agreement. Ghana lost a whopping $190 million. You had said earlier, on August 15, 2019, that you discovered fraud in the whole PDS agreement. Considering that Ghana has managed this compact right from the days of President Kufuor, President Mills, President Mahama successfully, will you say that there was some dereliction on your part, some lack of due diligence, which led to Ghana incurring this loss, which continues to reverberate in international corridors?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, of course, it's on record that the government of Ghana terminated the relationship between the Power Distribution Service Company, PDS, and the ECG. The termination, Mr. Chairman, was triggered as a result of occurrence of certain material evidences that need to have been provided that in view of government that were not provided. Mr. Chairman, it's important to note that a due diligence process in any construction activity is not an event. It's always an ongoing activity. The relationship between ECG and PDS under the arrangement was that there were certain conditions that we call condition precedents that were supposed to occur before the transfer of assets that we all witnessed in March. It came out clear that one of the critical items which has to do with the security of the assets, that the source of that security of assets was not genuine, was not valid, and it was described by even the same agency that was presupposed to have issued the security as fraud. On that basis, ECG and government thought that leaving an asset value of about $3 billion to a hand of the PDS, where security of those assets cannot be guaranteed, will not be good in management of our national assets as a country. Don't forget, these assets are for government and being managed on behalf of government by ECG. And so in event of default, if ECG cannot go back and get its $3 billion asset because the basis of covering that asset is found not to be valid, then of course the only thing that will be left to government is to go out of the marriage relationship. And I think this is exactly what government does. Now, the school of thought is that government has lost an amount of about $100 million as a result of the terminations of the marriage relationship between the two parties. Well, this $100 million is the money coming from the United States of America, the MCC compact. But do we look at the opportunity cost? Are we looking at the $100 million as an independent, irrespective of what would have happened? Do we want to say that, yes, let's go for the $100 million, but in case of default, we cannot call on the payment security, which is about $3 billion, which is higher? Obviously, any rational country will look at its asset ownership in terms of the value. So to me, the 3 billion, of course, far in excess of the 100 million that we're losing, because in case of default, we may not be able to call on our asset value of about $3 billion. So in my view, that contract, of course, as you rightly put it, yes, I did describe it as fraudulent, because from the source of where we're supposed to get a guarantee, they themselves described it as fraudulent, because number one, they stated that they are not in capacity to issue such a high level of guarantee. The person who issued the guarantee don't have the capacity to issue that guarantee. And number three, and that for such a guarantee to be issued, it needs to go through their national system. And all these things have not been done when we went on the verification exercises. It was on that basis that I described, the deal as fraudulent. And I don't think Ghana government, in the long run, have lost anything from that deal. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman, just a fuller, Honorable Ablakwa, for a minute, excuse me. Did you formally communicate any concern on the guarantees to PDS? And are you aware that PDS is in court making some claims? So other than the figure that the Honorable Ablakwa have shared with you, there were losses from the United States of America, the Millennium Challenge Authority, and then MIDA. Those losses is what he has referred to. A judgment debt occasioning out of it will constitute some loss to the Republic. What do you have to say to this? Thank you, Chair.
Well, Mr. Chairman, that will be predetermined. I would, Mr. Chairman, with all respect, because the case is within the court, I wouldn't say there will be any need for a judgment debt. Any aggrieved party has a right to seek judicial, address when it finds itself in a very difficult commercial position. PDS has found itself in this commercial position, and they have every right to go to court. But I think government of Ghana is right. The advice from Attorney General's office is right. The ECG has put in every indication that they've undergone this due diligence process, and we have every fact and details which trigger the termination of that contract. So I think that there will not be any a judgment in the future. Though they are in court, I don't...
Chairman, my other question, did you write to PDS to draw their attention to the fact that there were problems with the guarantees that they issued?
Yes, of course, ECG drew the attention of PDS, PDS, as you
Chairman, will appreciate any correspondence on the subject, whether from ECG or from you as Minister, any official communication to PDS, drawing their attention to those concerns you had with the guarantee. We appreciate you making it available to the Chairman through the clerk. Thank you. Honorable Ablakwa.
Sorry, Chairman, my question is a specific one. Do you take responsibility or not? Were you derelict?
Come again, Mr. Chairman, please.
Do you take responsibility for the whole PDS debacle, the whole caboodle? You were the sector minister. Do you take responsibility?
Yes, of course, Mr. Chairman, sector minister, at the time of which the terminations happened, must be responsible for assets and liabilities. So yes, of course, I take responsibility, and I know the termination was done at good cause and for convenience of Mother Ghana.
Honorable, was it your personal decision as a minister or a cabinet decision you implemented? Was it your personal decision as a minister or a cabinet decision you implemented?
Mr. President, this is a cabinet decision that we've implemented. It was not my unilateral decision. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The decision for termination was a cabinet decision.
Mr. Chairman, my second question, and by the way, the MCC official statement said the loss was $190 million, 190, and not $100 million. That is what Ghana lost. But let me move to the second question. 12 November 2019, Accra to have first Sky Train station in August 2020. This is TV3 News. The proposed Sky Train initiative in Accra provides for the development of 5 routes. A concession agreement for the construction of the Accra Sky Train project has been signed on the sidelines of the ongoing African Investment Forum in Johannesburg. The signing of the agreement means feasibility studies spanning a period of 9 months to determine the bankability of the project will commence, with the investors assuring the first station of the Accra Sky Train project will be opened in 9 months. At the signing ceremony on Monday, November 11, President Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo described it as a happy day for Ghana and her good people, unquote, adding that it is a critical step towards the consummation of this project and vivid testimony of the value of the African Investment Forum. President Akufo-Addo thanked the SkyTrain Consortium for putting together the wherewithal that is allowing this project to go forward, unquote. From your briefings you have received, why was this promise not achieved, that Accra will get a first SkyTrain in August 2020? We are now in February. And is this project still on course?
Thank you, Mr. President. The project is still on course. From advice I got from my ministry that if this House gives me the nod, I'll be going. The ministry, as part of its effort to improve the urban mobility and reduce traffic congestion in Accra, has engaged the services of firms to provide transaction advice services to the Ministry for the development of this light rail. As I speak today, the transaction advisors, Mr. Chairman, have undertaken a number of feasibility studies that will assist the ministry to go through the various phases for the development. This sky train that we're talking about is not the normal train, the train that you see in the sky running on electricity lines, but it's just going to be a high-rise train. What it means is that we'll raise up the columns, and of course, because of the congestion within the city, this train will be going above the normal ground level. So they'll be going up in the sky, but it doesn't necessarily mean the sky train as we normally talked about. So the government is in the process to partner with a PPP arrangement to undertake this. The delay in the project is as a result of any construction project delay. Some understanding with regard to the negotiation that is currently blocking the construction. If I assume office, Mr. Chairman, I want to assume this House, if they give me the nod, that it will be one of the priority projects that I will take into consideration, because that definitely would also address our traffic congestion that we have within Accra and Kumasi. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, my final question is a reputational matter, but very important, very, very grave issue. On the 27th of December 2020, a bailiff from the Whole High Court by name Emmanuel Aziaka, who was asked by the court following a successful ex parte injunction which had been secured by the legendary Chachu Chikata. The bailiff told the media that your men, your macho men, upon citing him, physically assaulted him. To be clear, they beat him to pulp. The pictures make for worrying observation. My Joy Online reports, bailiff says he was beaten by Amewu's boys while delivering injunction. Citi FM Online, on the same day, interviewed Mr. Aziaka, and he said, quote, Mr. Amewu rolled down the glass of his car when I was being attacked by his boys, and he rolled it back up. He did not intervene, unquote. How do you respond to this grave matter? Because you have been checking, you have since not uttered a word following this incident.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, first, let me put it on record that I am not a violent person, but I also want to use the opportunity to sympathize with the bailiff if the incident did happen. I was told of this incident 3 days after the Thanksgiving program that I've undertaken. And it was on social media that I saw this, that a gentleman was attacked. Those cannot be my tasks. I work with very faithful and dedicated people that accompany me to my scene. If indeed this happened, of course, I don't see the reason why it should be attributed to me. I sympathize with him if that actually happened, but I cannot never be held responsible, and I never, on any occasion, roll my glass to look at a victim that has been beaten. That is not my nature. If I did come across such instances, what I would have done under normal circumstances is to stop it, irrespective of what might be happening. So I never roll my glass. I was not at the scene of the incident, but I saw this also in social media. And if it did happen, I sympathize with him. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any action you took when you saw it on social media?
I engaged immediately called 3 of the guys that were following me, my security guys, and asked them. They said, no, they are not responsible. And at that time, they have also not heard the news. So I was showing to them that this is what I've said. I tried to interrogate it, and I was told by them that they were not responsible and they know nothing about it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Very well. Colleagues, it's 2 hours. We will take 5 minutes break, walk around, and resume in exactly 5 minutes. Honourable members, the meeting is called back to order, please. Very well. Honourable Erikopoku, I'll give you 2 opportunities too. My brother-in-law said I shouldn't recognize you, but you know, because of some of them, I'm recognizing you. Ask 2 questions, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Honorable nominee, my first question has to do with street lighting. Street lighting. Street lighting promotes security and improves the quality of life for our people. It is for this reason that the public lighting levy was imposed on all domestic consumers of electricity in this country. You recall that in August 2020, you appeared before this August House to answer a question in respect of how much you have realized in terms of money from the public lighting levy for 2018 and 2019. You indicated before the House that for the 2 years, you realized 273 million Ghana cedis. And out of that amount, 84 million Ghana cedis was released to you. And at the time you were speaking to the House, you had expended 60 million, 64 million out of that. This gives us an indication that on an annual basis, that levy is able to rake in not less than 137 million Ghana cedis. This, I believe, is enough to provide efficient street lighting system for the good people of this country. Unfortunately, that is not the case. Why is it that Ghanaians have paid so much for street lighting, yet we still have problems with street lighting in our country?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think you are right that the street lighting is very key for the country. Yes, Mr. Chairman, as a ministry, we began an aggressive process to introduce street lights to regional capitals and some selected municipal capitals across this country. And the facts are there for everybody to see. Unfortunately, the amount that you talked about 100 million, annually, can provide street lights to maybe just about 2 or 3 municipal, districts. So there is a need for more capital injection, to be able to undertake this activity efficiently and effectively. Not all the 100% of the street light levy comes to the ministry. As you rightly put it, in 2020, about 84 was sent to the ministry. So I think going forward, my advice I will give to the new sector minister coming in is to lobby for more of the proportions of the levy to come to the ministry so that they can embark on more aggressive street light for other communities. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Honourable Minister, let's be clear. The street light levy, it is to pay for what? The energy used or the bulbs provided? What is it to pay for?
Well, it's for both directions, both the energy use and then for the service. The levy actually is placed on every consumer's bill. So if you take your bill today, you see a percentage that you pay for the street light. Most of the questions that arise in some communities, just as the honourable member has put it clear, is that some communities are paying for street lights, meanwhile they are not enjoying the benefit of the street light. And that is why the ministry came out with a policy to make sure that the extension of street lights cuts across districts regional capitals. You've seen that we started that in most of the regional capitals and then moved down to some of the district level. It's a process, and the incoming minister, of course, I'm going to speak to him to make sure that this process is completed. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Now, my second question. In paragraph 463 of the 2017 budget, it is indicated that the government of the MPP, under the leadership of Nana Addo Akufo-Addo, took over this country when electricity coverage was at 83.24%. And when you come to the 2020 budget, at paragraph 818, it is provided that electricity coverage was at 84.89%, 84.98%, indicating that in the last 4 years, electricity coverage was increased by 1.74%. Can you explain to the committee what has accounted for this tortoise-like pace
have been extraction of the resources. Because at that point, they were talking about whether we consider the oil or we consider the gas to be flared. Because the gas at that time, again, within the Western Corridor was stranded, and we do not therefore have a demand for it, because facilities to consume the gas as early as that time were not available. So after movement of the car power and creating other necessary demands in terms of other facilities that are taking the gas, for instance, those ceramic factories that we see in Takoradi taking the gas, we have minimized largely on the flaring of the gas. It was flared basically because of the need to maintain the reservoir pressure to enable us to extract the oil. Mr. Chairman, I'm not in a position to quantify the cost, and if this House, of course, will allow, if I'm granted the permission, I would come back to the House and provide the actual cost of gas that was flared during the period. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I'm going to a different ministry.
No, that's why we should be looking forward rather than we're spending so much time for matters behind us. Yes, Honorable Muntaka.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, the nominee started as Minister for Lands and Natural Resources, right?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
And under you was the Mineral Development Fund?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
What is the procedure for disbursement of the Mineral Development Fund?
Mr. Chairman, the Mineral Development Fund is expected to be distributed through some formula and to be presided over by the board. The board is responsible, as the authorizing body for distributing the Mineral Development Fund. The formula for distribution is also as enshrined in the law of the Mineral Development Act.
Why did you disburse the Mineral Development Fund in 2017 without the board? Why did you disburse that fund without the board in 2017?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, in absence of the board, the sector minister has an oversight responsibility. And constituting the board, Mr. Chairman, at that time took some months. There was urgent need for the fund to undertake some critical activities that are very essential to the sustainability of the fund. It was on that basis that I authorized the disbursement of the fund without the approval from the board, because there was no board in position at that time, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, I want to refer the nominee to the Mineral Development Act, Act 912. Mr. Chairman, Section 5, application of the fund. No, sorry, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, Mr. Chairman, sorry, I was right. Section 5. For the purpose of achieving the object of the fund, monies from the fund shall be applied to the relevant activities that the board may determine. Mr. Speaker, in this act, there's no way that it said that in the absence of the board, the minister should disburse the fund. But if you could guide me, being the sector minister then, which section of this act enables him to disburse the fund without a board?
Mr. Chairman, what I did say that as a sector minister, I was responsible for those agencies with an oversight responsibility. At the time I authorized the disbursement, the board was not in existence, and there was an urgent need for sustainability of the fund to go on with its operational activities. The disbursement of the fund is in accordance with the formula. So irrespective of a minister or a board, the formula will be followed. What I did was just to ask them to go according to the formula and disburse it accordingly. The fund was not disbursed outside the formula.
The them refers to who? He said what you did was to ask them to go in accordance with the formula. Who is them?
The board. Was to ask the Mineral Development Operational Activity, which is the Chief Executive.
The management.
The management, yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chairman, I refer him to Section 7, functions of the board. The board is responsible for the management of the fund and for the purpose and for that purpose shall ensure the proper and effective performance of the functions of the fund. Mr. Chairman, I still ask him, which section of this act gave you the authority to disburse without the board?
Mr. Chairman, this states that in absence of the board, every ministry has its agencies. In absence of board, the minister responsible takes that oversight responsibility. And what is interesting about this particular fund is that the funds are not distributed by unilateral decisions. There is a particular laid down formula, 2%, 3%, 16%. So what I did was to authorize them to comply with the formula for distribution, because there was an urgent need for operation of the board, and we couldn't have operation of the fund, and we couldn't have wait for the board to come into existence. If we had wait to do that, the fund would not operate. And it was on that basis that we authorized the fund management to go ahead to disburse, the fund to the various agencies under it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, on this lastly, is he of the view that once ministers play oversight, in the absence of a board, the minister acts on behalf of the board or can take actions that boards are supposed to take? Is that what you are implying?
Mr. Chairman, that's exactly what I intend to say.
Mr. Chairman, he was at the land ministry, and earlier to a question about illegal mining and the excavators that were purported to have gotten missing. You said that you are not aware that any of the excavators were missing. Is that what the impression that I got?
At the time I was the lands minister, there was no missing excavator when I was the lands minister.
When you seized them, where did you place them? Where were they placed after your seizure? When you seized them, where did you place them?
Mr. Chairman, I earlier stated that I do not seize any excavator. I asked for withdrawal of excavators from mining sites.
And the military or the team, the Operation Vanguard, did so, right?
Chairman, I was not the chairman of that committee. And so the details will be with the chairman of the Interministerial Committee, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, so when you asked that those excavators be withdrawn from the field, you didn't follow up where they were withdrawing them to?
Mr. Chairman, I did state to the Honorable House that at the time I asked for withdrawal of excavators and extended it by an additional 30 days, about 500 excavators were withdrawn from the mining sites and taken out of the mining environment. What happened thereafter was the seizure, which went through other processes, because as a minister, you cannot seize excavators. Excavators from mining sites can only be seized with a regulatory framework derived from the AG's department, and that is the process. That process, I did not undertake process. What I did was to ask for the withdrawal of excavators from mining sites.
So when those excavators were withdrawn, did you follow up to see that the regulatory framework that you are mentioning was followed through?
Chairman, I left the Ministry of Lands.
Honorable, when you say withdraw them, was that an action from your ministry or those who took them to the site were to take them back?
I asked those who sent the excavators to the mining site to take them back. That was what I meant, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, I want to find out from him if you'll be surprised if those owners meet you today and tell you that they never received back their excavators. Will you be surprised?
Well, of course, that might be after I left the ministry, so I would not be surprised if it happened. I wouldn't be surprised.
Mr. Chairman, you are even currently the present representative at the Ministry of Energy, right? The present representative at the Ministry of Energy. I'm saying currently you are.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
And there's been a lot of talk about this aluminium integrated program from the government. They talk about the aluminium integrated program that involves Valco, mining of iron ore or aluminium, and all the others.
Yes, Mr.
As the Minister for Energy, you know that you cannot do this without sufficient power.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
And you know that it is not just any power, you need cheap power.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
What have you done in the past 2 years that I've been at the ministry to help generate cheap power that will enable this aluminium integrated program to take off?
Mr. Chairman, discussions have been held at various levels to make sure that available and cheaper power is made available to the corporation, which is again Gideon Corporation, to make sure that they can undertake the refining of the product. What we were discussing at that time was to dedicate hydro, because to be able to do such projects with some level of return on investment, we should be looking at a power of, say, 2 cents per kilowatt hour. Today, in Ghana, it's difficult to get that. So the school of thought was to dedicate Volta Lake, our Volta Dam, Akosombo, which is, of course, hydro, that will be dedicated solely for the industry. There was also another school of thought where the proposals from some companies from Japan were here to say that they are prepared to generate, I think about 800 megawatts, but the first 300 megawatts or 400 megawatts will trade at a value of, say, 2 cents per kilowatt hour, and the rest will trade at par with the current pricing in the system. But because of our capacity issues that we have, it was very difficult to take in such a proposal. And so as at the time I was leaving the ministry, my discussion that I have with the team was to see how we can dedicate hydro for this particular industry. Because hydro today, we might have recovered the cost of investment over our Akosombo Dam, apart from the operational charges. And thereby, we can trade hydro for the industry at a very low rate.
Mr. Chairman, if you were suggesting we isolating hydro for those purposes, you know the implication on the general tariffs, right?
Yes, of course, the implication on the general tariff, I know. We should expect a slight movement up of the tariff. Already, the tariff in the sub-region, our tariff is quite high, but the level of tariff is as a result of some of the inefficiencies that I've talked about. If as a country we are able to reduce the distribution losses, from a current 25, 26% down to even about 5%, it means we are injecting an additional 20% into the system, which can also come down to work, lower the tariff. So we need to do some internal arrangements within the setup of the power agencies to reduce the tariff. Then, of course, we can migrate hydro to the sector. That may have some level of impact on the consumer, but that may not be much. Mr. Chairman, what is also interesting is that in most developed countries, you realize that the tariff for industries are far cheaper than the tariff for consumers. But in Ghana, it's the reverse. And if you want, as a country, to industrialize, then we must begin to look at giving the industry some form of, relief in terms of the tariff they enjoy, so that they can grow the industries within the shortest possible of time.
Mr. Chairman, this idea that he's talking about, yes, for industry, it should be cheaper than for consumption. What prevents you from implementing it whilst you were at the ministry?
Mr. Chairman, it's a very difficult policy issue. We began discussions, and if you recollect, the 30% reductions in tariff, the year 2017 was migrating towards that direction. I will keep up with this discussion with the new minister that is coming to take over from me and see how he can progress to address the problem for industry to enjoy a reliable tariff.
You know, Valco has been operating 2 port lines for a very long period of time.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
When you were there as minister, what have you been able to do to help them to be able to fully operate?
Mr. Chairman, the problem of Valco, it's something as a country that we all need to look at. Cheaper power for Valco at the expense of consumers, or consumers in terms of power enjoying cheaper than what we will give Valco. That issue has not been addressed completely. And so when I was a minister, of course, we tried to put in measures. You will recollect that even before the start operation of the two ports, there were some difficulties in terms of the two ports that they currently operating. So when I was a minister, we tried to look into some of these power issues. They have huge debt, of course, which would have triggered shutting down their power sources. But this discussion, we've engaged with VRA to make sure that they give them some room to operate and see how they can recover their costs. It is expected that VACO is going to play a very significant role in the President's agenda of integrated aluminium industry that we wanted to undertake. When that happens, VACO will become a very productive and profitable institution in the country.
Well, even before the program kickstarts, even with what they are currently operating, we are not able to get them sufficient power to operate fully. How sure are we that when all the other segment of the integrated program kicks in, we'll be able to have cheap power for them to run sufficiently?
I say, as a country, we need to begin to look at dedicating the hydropower as a source for the industrialization agenda of the aluminium industry. That had not been finalized. If those discussions are finalized, what it means is that we, from beginning, going to subsidize the operation, of VALCO. Don't forget, VALCO is going to work in tandem with the other sectors that will be involved in the refining and production of the aluminium industry. The raw bauxite, of course, will be coming from the site. That raw bauxite will go through some processes. And those processes, together with VACO, they will all come together. So whether you're going to lose at the end of exploration or production of the raw bauxite, or you lose at the end of the refining of the bauxite to alumina or whatever it is, this discussion will have to play out. But definitely, you may not be able to make it at all the levels. So you may give and take. And that was understanding that VACO could come in with a cheaper source of power, and VACO will use that at its bargaining, to match with the company that will be into the production of the bauxite.
Do you remember the generation capacity of our country as of 2017? The generation capacity in 2017?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
How much was it?
The available, the installed capacity was about 4,000 megawatts. But the available at that time, because of issues of fuel fluctuations, it keeps varying and its availability. But at peak, we were having a peak period sometimes about 2,200 megawatts or 2,100 megawatts.
And as of today?
Today, our peak demand is still in the range of about 2,300 megawatts. Our available installed capacity is about 5,000 megawatts.
Which other plants came on board to move us from the around 4,000 to the around 5,000?
We have a number of power plants that have been signed in since 2016. For instance, the Amewu, the car power, all those emergency plants that have come on board. Amandi, for instance, has also just come on board. Sun Power has come on board. All those, additional generation in all totaling quite close to about 1,800 were additional power plants that came on board.
So will you say we have excess capacity?
Will
you say we have excess capacity?
The issue of excess capacity have to do with the availability of the plant when called on by demand as a result of the constraints in demand. And so, yes, of course, we still have excess capacity. Installed capacity is far ahead of what I talked about. Yes, so as I speak today, we still have excess capacity.
Do we export power to any neighboring country?
Mr. Chairman, yes, of course. I'm happy to announce to this House that for the first time in the history of this country, export arrangements are in excess, sometimes about 250 megawatts, 300 megawatts between Ivory Coast, Burkina Faso, Benin, and Republic of Togo. Yes, so the export arrangements are ongoing.
So why was this noise about we were losing so much money or take or pay?
Yeah, because, Mr. Chairman, export of power, it's not like transporting a cargo of crude oil. Power will have to travel through a medium. Unfortunately, most of these countries don't have developed infrastructure as we have in Ghana. So we may export power to the border between Ghana and Burkina Faso. But when it gets to Burkina Faso, there is no demand for it. And these are some of the restraints. We could increase on our export ability. But because the infrastructure are not developed in these surrounding countries that we have, we are limited by the amount of power that we can export. And that is why the rest comes back to our book, as power being available, but not consumed, and therefore reflect as an excess capacity.
Yes, so why was there the need for us to extend the contracts on some of the IPPs?
It was very important to look at the payment patterns on government. The extension of the contract, for instance, the discussion with Car Power, was to make sure that the gas that was stranded, Mr. Chairman, it's on record that we were losing quite close to $50 million, on monthly basis because of stranded gas in the West that were not consumed by any power plant. When we move the car power from Tema to the West, we have saved that 50 million. If car power is not available to consume that gas, what it means is that that gas is also, again, on take and pay basis. And so whether you consume it or not, you may have to pay until the time that you begin to consume it. What we did was to look at the capacity charges and spread it over a time, because payment in terms of cash flow on government part was becoming very difficult. So how do we reduce the money that government will have to advance frequently to enable the power plants that depends on gas also to live longer? The only thing we can do was to make sure we extended this. So car power, for instance, because it's feeding on gas and the gas is available, there is a need to look into how long car power will stay. So negotiations began to make sure that we make car power stay longer to consume the gas.
Is it the same reason why AXA was also extended?
The ASCA discussions, of course, came to cabinet, was approved, discussions are going, and it was the same basis because ASCA was converting from heavy fuel, which is very expensive, also to gas. Again, because of the stranded gas we have, and because of the bi-directional flow that we have. Today, Mr. Chairman, we will be able to have gas flowing from Takoradi to Tema and from Tema to Takoradi. So the thinking is that we could have ASCA now relying on gas rather than a heavy fuel.
Mr. Chairman, you were the Minister of Lands when the forest reserve at Kofi Man in the Afenya area was returned to the owners.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
What necessitated that?
Mr. Chairman, it was a petition from the landowners at the time. The land, Mr. Chairman, is not acquired by government. It was earmarked, but not acquired. The inhabitants have then, taking over the site for development project. So what the landowners asked for was to rectify the arrangements and then, return their land back to them. That was exactly what we did. The petition was sent to the Lands Commission. A committee was put forward. The examination was done, and therefore was returned back to the owners.
Did you get some of the land?
No, Mr. Chair.
Did you buy some of it?
No, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, in Hohoi, before the election, you assisted the residents to change their meters from prepaid to postpaid meters, right?
Some communities, Mr. Chairman.
And in those communities, what happened when later the ECG came there to do disconnection?
Mr. Chairman, the Chinese company was working there, and the meters were really needed because these were houses that were consuming electricity. They don't have meters, and so ECG would not even have an ability to go and collect the rents. So what we do was to speed up the installation of meters in those various communities.
Did the ECG workers got beaten? Did they got beaten when they were trying to chase the residents for non-payment of their bills?
Not as I know, Mr. Chairman.
You didn't know that the ECG in Hohoi had to close down its office because of this assault on their staff?
Mr. Chairman, not as I'm aware of.
And the accusation was that you ordered for their beating?
Mr. Chairman, that is total false. That may not be true, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, in an earlier answer to the bailiff that received some beating, did I hear you say that you only heard of the story 3 days after?
I heard this, not that I heard it, I read it from Joy, was it a Joy, one of the social media, I could not remember, on the WhatsApp. I read it on the WhatsApp, yeah.
When this happened, it was all over the news. You never heard it until 3 days after.
Precisely, Mr. Chairman.
And since you heard it, have you tried to reach out to the bailiff?
Mr. Chairman, what I did was because my name was mentioned in that incident, that my tax, I did not have any tax, and so I talked to my guys, the security guys who were around me, and they have neither no knowledge of the incident. And so I could not probe further. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, in an answer to an earlier question on the PDS, you said there are some of the information, you said certain materials, evidence that they provided were not genuine and not valid and they were fraudulent. Is that what you said?
Precisely, Mr. Chairman.
What due diligence did you do before giving the contracting PDS?
Mr. Chairman, at the time of the PDS transaction from commencement, I was not a sector minister.
When you took over as the sector minister, what did you do to ascertain the facts?
Mr. Chairman, I direct ECG to go ahead with its ongoing due diligence process. And it was this due diligence process that established the fact that the security provided was fraudulently acquired and was not valid.
Are you then saying that the minister before you did not do a good job?
Honorable,
not at all, Mr.
That's not a fair
Chairman.
question. Please ask another question.
Are you saying that the Ministry of Energy, did not do its work very well?
Not at all, Mr.
Honorable,
Chairman.
it's the same thing. It's not fair to ask him to pass judgment.
Mr. Chairman, this is a very serious thing for the minister to tell us that the ministry that he supervises did not do its work well to the extent that the security that was provided was fraudulent. Mr. Chairman, this is something that we need to probe in.
Honorable Leader, he said that when he came, he asked them to continue with their due diligence.
And I was asking whether the ministry is then saying that the ministry did not do due diligence before awarding the contract.
Mr. Chairman, this states that the due diligence process is not an event. It's an ongoing process. And so the ministry could go ahead and give the contract subject to conclusion or evidence that the security granted was valid. And this was exactly what was happening. So ECG was undertaking a due diligence process to establish the validity of the security that was provided by the PDS company.
How long has the ministry been engaging in this attempt to engage PDS before the actual contract was signed? How long did it take the ministry?
Mr. The asset was handed over, I think it's in March 2019. In March, the asset was handed over. Before the handing over of the asset, the condition precedent was the fulfillment of a guarantee that merits acceptance by the ECG. So ECG is in process. The guarantee has been provided to ECG. But ECG could not just hold the guarantee and accept it in total faith. What they did further was to probe further to establish whether the guarantee provided was really valid and whether it conforms to the specification as put in the lease and bulk purchase agreement which they signed between the two companies. It was through that process that ECG realized that no, the guarantee is not a valid guarantee and it was acquired fraudulently. So
did the ministry have a transaction advisor for that process, for that project?
Not as I know of, Mr. Chairman.
No, but you've been there for the past 2 years.
No, I don't have a transaction advisor when I was the minister.
So the ministry was doing this on its own?
Mr. Chairman, it's also important to note that this transaction is a transaction between government company, ECG, and PDS. The two were in this relationship. The ministry provides an oversight responsibility. So the ministry itself was not in direct contract with the agencies. But as I was the minister, the time I was the minister, I do not have any transaction advisor.
Mr. Chairman, when he says the ministry didn't really, they were only providing a supervisory role, it was the ministry that brought this agreement to this house. Do you remember that?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
And the ministry, in bringing the document to the house, has not ascertained for itself, convinced itself that it was carrying a legitimate transaction that it was very sure of. That's why, before bringing it to Parliament?
At the point the ministry brought the document to Parliament, they considered the transaction as being valid, but subject to fulfillment of a critical condition precedent, which was not fulfilled at the end.
Chairman, with your leave, I have a follow-up.
Yes.
So, Honorable Minister, in your answer to the critical question raised about the security, you gave an impression that upon signing, ECG had a duty to do an enhanced due diligence.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
And it was as a result of this enhanced due diligence, you insisted it be done, that resulted in this matter of fraudulent.
Precisely so.
So you would say that your initiative saved the Ghanaian taxpayer, correct?
Precisely so, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to find out whether, when this was noticed, there was official communication of this to PDS.
Yes, ECG has communicated to PDS, and a number of meetings have been held. I've attended a couple of those meetings myself as the sector minister there. So yes, that has been done.
And what answer did they provide to your notice of their fraudulent, what do you call it, security?
Initial discussion, PDS insisted that there was a valid fulfillment of the condition precedent, which is a subject matter of their security. They did indicate that it was valid, and they insisted on that.
Mr. Chairman, I want to find out from the nominee whether Dumso is back.
Dumso, Mr. Chairman, it's not back. The prolonged era of intermittent power supply, I think, is thing of the past.
So what is accounting for the recent intermittent of?
Mr. Chairman, I did say that currently there's a process of replacement of obsolete equipment. The President has injected, through his directive, injected about $100 million through ECG to replace some of those equipment. So that is ongoing now. In those areas that these activities are happening, of course, you expect that there will be some interruptions. What I expect the ECG to do is to inform those communities, which of course I had a discussion. I met the ECG MD today and asked him that they should give prior notice to those areas that work is going on. And I think they'll continue to do that. But in the era in which we are now, I can assure this House that the lights will be on. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, in an earlier answer about the unfortunate incidents in the Krobo area where they had a fracas with the ECG staff that led to some shootings and death, you promised the United Krobo Foundation that you are going to deal with this matter, right?
Yes.
But in an earlier answer to a question, you said the police were rather handling it.
Mr. Chairman, we've not been able to deal with it. I put a committee together. The committee commenced its work, but at the same time, the matter was lodged with the police. And I think somehow along the line, the committee slowed down on its operation. Mr. Chairman, I would take this matter up seriously and maybe advise my coming minister to take it up and make sure that the committee completes its work. I want to use this opportunity to maybe say to my good friends in the Krobo land that the delay in this report, of course, I'm responsible, but I can assure them that the next minister, with the support from our outfit, we will make sure that we resolve the issue for them. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, you remember they told you that they were waiting for the outcome before they will start paying fully their bills?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
So you know currently they are not paying fully their bills?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
And you know that that is likely to create another problem into the future?
Precisely so, Mr. Chairman.
So that is why you must do well to get this problem over, maybe probably before you leave.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We will do so.
So that's an assurance that you try to work at it before you leave.
Mr. Chairman, I will do my best.
Mr. Chairman, the railway lines, the status of the Takwa to Prestia lines, what briefing did you get on that?
The Takra Deep port to Kumasi the progress on the secondary Kojuk reconstructed. And
I'm talking about Takwa Prestia.
Takwa
Prestia.
That is on the western line. That is the existing line through Unsuta to Takrade Awaso, which is a distance of about 64 kilometers. Mr. Chairman, this line, the briefing I've been given is that it's one of the lines which is best for BOT development process. And plans are far advanced to subject this line to a development. Research has been done on it in terms of the feasibility studies, and a number of proposals has also been received towards this line. The intention was to move that whole section down up to Kumasi, which is very key because of the exploitation of the mineral resources at Nyinaheni and Opomanso along the route. And that line, of course, is going to be one of our mineral lines when it's completed. So there's a lot of progress on the line. I did state earlier on about the tremendous work that has been done by my predecessor, and I think getting to office, if the House gives me the nod, I will make sure that we speed up other works on that line.
Well, this is something that during the reign of President Kufuor, the Takwa Goldfish and then Golden Star were to fix. Those two companies had then promised to fix that rail line. But unfortunately, the Gold Star has changed hands, and now they are using a bridge around Bogoso that has not been even maintained since the 60s. And the danger is that if this bridge also goes off, that will mean the whole of that enclave is likely to suffer heavily. So it is my hope that when you get the opportunity, you pay attention to this part of the...
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, lastly, the land around Afenya stretch on the Akosombo, Tema Akosombo line. And I mean, even though they tried to bring a petition, that is too late. There's evidence that, yes, that land government has shown interest, as it always does, but has not paid compensation to the original owners, and therefore they went ahead to lease it to individuals that have built their homes, and because of the construction of the rail line, a number of communities under Afenya East, Afenya Zongo, and Afenya Ablekuma had their homes and properties demolished, and no compensation had been paid them when they have, rightfully acquired their lease through the original owners that have not been paid compensation. Minister, I know you are not there yet. Will you take interest in this to be able to get fair hearing from these residents and probably assist them to get compensated?
I will do so if this House gives me the nod, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much.
Yes,
Mr. Chair, I have no questions for you.
Yes, Honorable Minority Leader.
Chairman, let me thank you very much. And just to take him back to where the Honorable Muntaka left, earlier in an answer to a question by the Honorable Ablakwa on PDS, you seem to be very proud that it was terminated on the basis of a fraudulent guarantee. And Chairman, I'm just referring to a statement which was issued by the Millennium Challenge Corporation of the United States of America, and it reads, statement regarding termination of the private sector concession by the government of Ghana. And Chairman, the words I will emphasize is instructive. Washington, D.C., October 23, 2019. In response to the government of Ghana's disappointing decision to terminate the concession agreement between the Electricity Company of Ghana, ECG, to private operator Power Distribution Services Ghana Limited, PDS. And then the statement goes further to say 190 million funds granted to Ghana for the 20-year concession from ECG to PDS no longer available. Is that a proud thing that apart from this monumental loss of $190 million, you also must appreciate the fact that this was the first time ever the country had moved strategically to allow for private sector participation in the distribution of electricity, which is also significant. Now, you have repeatedly said that you wrote to PDS. Can you provide a copy of the letter which was written to PDS, either by you as Minister for Energy or ECG, to prompt them on the problem associated with the guarantee they did? Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Chairman, I will provide a letter from ECG to.
Thank you, Chairman. And then also, in response to an earlier question, you said the debt is 1.5 billion US dollars. Has the legacy debt been cleared totally? The legacy debt, which was in the region of 2 billion US dollars, as I heard President Nana Akufo-Addo announce on a foreign trip to Canada. Is this 1.5 to be added to the 2 billion, or the 2 billion have been cleared and this is new additional debt within the energy sector?
Thank you. The debt as it stands now is 1.5, and that means that it has been brought down from the 2.7 level to the current 1.5 level.
How much does government owe independent power producers?
Mr. Chairman, today government will be owing quite close to $700 million to the combined independent power producers.
700 million US dollars. Over what period? Up to December 2020, or you've added, we are now almost in the first quarter of 2021.
Because, Mr. Chairman, these debts are built on existing debt in terms of accumulation. And so it is difficult for us to separate as to the proportion of debt that have been set aside by this new regime. But I'm saying that at the time of 2020, 2016, thereabouts, when we took over till now, the beginning, the debt was in the range of about 2.7. Of course, new debts have been added, but now, as we speak today, the debt level is about 1.5 billion US dollars, with between 600 to 700 million US dollars being the debt.
Chairman, that's appreciated. Can you share what you know as outgoing Minister for Energy? What is it that GRA, GRADCO, ECG owe to each other, respectively? Those in the chain, ECG, how much? To GRADCO, how much? And to VRA, how much? To the best of your knowledge.
Supply the interagency debt arrangements to this committee because there's still reconciliation ongoing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Do you have an idea how much it is?
If the IPP's debt add up to about 700 million, then the debt between the other companies obviously will be in a range of about 800 million US dollars.
So beyond termination of PDS, the Minister of Finance in the budget statement of 2020 had this emphatic statement to make. Moreover, government remains committed to the energy sector reforms. What other reforms have you undertaken as lead minister in that ministry?
We have begun an aggressive process to come out with what we call the cash waterfall mechanism. The cash waterfall mechanisms allows the various operators in the sector to have liquidity space. All the collections are put into the baskets, and from that basket, disbursements are being made based on the formula that we arrive on. Either to the money goes to ECG, and ECG have to use its own unilateral decisions, to make payment to the various IPPs. So we have introduced what we call the cash waterfall mechanism, which currently is operating. We have undertaken a very aggressive energy sector recovery program, which span up to between 5 years. The rationale behind that program is to lower the legacy debts and brought them to zero. And you can see that consistently as we begin to follow the energy sector recovery program, we are bringing the debt down to a level that I just mentioned.
Chairman, the Honorable Muntaka referred to you exercising oversight mandate in the absence of a board for the Mineral Development Fund. After the Minerals Income Investment Act was passed at 978, did you appreciate what the consequence of that will be on the Mineral Development Fund and for community and chiefs benefiting from the Mineral Development Fund? Did you see any nexus of a relationship?
I did not really see that relationship, but what I'm quite aware of that the rationale for the establishment of the Mineral Development Fund is mostly to benefit the communities, so that the fund has a formula of direct allocation to the communities and also the affected areas that exploration and mining activities have been undertaken.
In the briefing you have received so far, what's the status of the Ghana-Burkina Faso railway line?
Thank you. Feasibility studies have been conducted. Request for proposal has been sent. 3 companies have been shortlisted. The Burkinabes, as I speak today, Mr. Chairman, are ready to hit the ground running. And so we are now going to do evaluation on these 3 companies, and which of them might emerge as a winner. Of course, we will begin to take the process forward from there. So a lot of activities have been done on that major line.
Earlier on, you responded to a question from the Honorable Patricia, I believe. Now, you are trying to explain the benefit of rail transport against investment in roads. You know that when we do the roads, particularly for purpose of bauxite and others, they deteriorate. So we need, you've traveled abroad extensively. There are people in New York who work in Washington because they have a reliable fast train line to join. There are people in New York who work maybe in other parts of the U.S. because of a reliable train line. Share your dream. What do you want the railway sector to look like in Ghana?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I want a railway sector where my people from Hohwe can move from Hohwe and come to Accra, undertake their activities, those who want to work here, and then go back within a period of 2 hours. I want the railway sector where traffic density of our road will gradually migrate onto the railway. I want a railway sector that will give a credence or an advantage to lasting durations for our road. Currently, the traffic density of our roads, the lifespan of most of these roads, are 3 to 4 years. And we spend a lot of money on rehabilitation process of these roads. I want a railway sector that will migrate, these difficulties. A sector that will begin to have a multiplier effect on the growth of this country. That is how I see the railway sector.
Thank you, Chairman. But you note that it's capital intensive. You can live the dream only if you have the money. Where would you find the resources to improve the railway regime of Ghana?
Mr. Chairman, it's a question of priority. As a country, do we have to sit down and say we don't have the money? We wait for the money before we build the rails? As a country, do we have to say, well, our debt to GDP ratio is quite high and we cannot go and burden this country with any additional debt on our balance sheet? We need to take the railway sector as a priority. And I think that that is the only way we can go. So yes, of course, global funds, difficult, country has limited resources for the construction of the railway, but His Excellency Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo mentioned it categorically about his interest. That gives me the justification that there will be some attention in that area. If you say that we can send some amount of attention to that area, then of course we will look for the money. The money can come in as a debt. My belief is that that debt will be paid off after the construction of the railway because of the impact it's going to bring into this economy. So we may have the debt, we may have the rising debt GDP ratio, but the impact of the construction of railway will clear most of those debts in the near future.
Now, we've passed the Public-Private Act, Partnership Act. Do you share the view, for instance, that we should just go in, for instance, a $1 billion facility, maybe from Japan or China or any other country with expertise in rail development, then make the annual budget funding amount of under the Petroleum Revenue Management Act a collateral? Then we know that we are investing $1 billion. This is how it will be serviced over a period of time. Then we can be certain that we have dedicated resources for railway development. Do you share that view?
Mr. Chairman, that's a very brilliant idea. I will give it due consideration in the House. Give me the note.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. The Honorable Member for Ejisu, in requesting for Bonkra, naturally, if you want to develop the inland port, you must be looking at trade facilitation, the ease of doing business, the speed of doing business. Now, you see, the western and eastern lines are to facilitate passenger and freight movement, including activation of the Bonkra inland port. Now, in your briefing, are you aware that a contract was signed in January 2020, EPC, for the construction of a standard gauge line from the Takoradi port to Uni Valley? Has that been brought to your notice?
Yes, that has been brought to my notice.
Will you facilitate the movement of passengers and freight to Bonkra as has started under the reconstruction of the Western Railway line?
Precisely so, Mr. Chairman.
Why is it a standard gauge
Mr. Chairman, the rationale for the standard gauge is the migration of the whole world from the narrow gauge. The standard gauge, as I stated earlier, have its own advantage: the speed, the axle load, and the stability in terms of its movement. And so Ghana as a country, the master plan is to migrate away from the narrow gauge that we have to standard gauge. Only few countries currently still use the narrow gauge. In our sub-region, we have, for instance, only South Africa. And so when it comes to issue of spare parts, the difficulty to get them will be very difficult. And that may also be the underlying reason why the master plan suggests that we move to the standard gauge. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So, do I take it that Aflao Elubo Railway Line, Kotoku Hune Valley Railway Line, Metro Light and Transit Systems in Accra and Kumasi will not suffer under your hands as Minister responsible for railways?
Mr. Chairman, we will do our best to make sure that the master plan is implemented from phase to phase.
Chairman, I'm about ending for the Minister-Designate for Railways. In one of your responses to an earlier issue raised by a colleague, you were categorical in terms of different tariff regime for payment by consumers and by industry. I'm aware that the Association of Ghana Industry, AGI, have repeatedly made strong representations to you as minister to correct that wrong, in order that in Ghana we are not using power for purposes of generating growth and investment, but just preso, as Honorable he said, we are just interested in those who use it for preso, on and on. What will you do? You are leaving the ministry. The AGI is essentially disappointed in the government of Ghana for not leaving the talk on this particular matter. Have you recommended that to the new coming minister to draw a dichotomy between consumers, ordinary, who use it for their domestic purposes, and those who need it for their industrial purposes? Thank you, Chair.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, that appeal, of course, was sent to me. We looked at it, but at the time, as I stated earlier, some recovery programs will need to be completed within the sector. Currently, high losses, power theft, non-availability of meters. So the intention was to address some of these system deficiencies that we have. Obsolete equipment, which, of course, the President has given a directive replacing almost over $100 million worth of obsolete equipment. It is our belief, my belief at that time, that after we have addressed these deficiencies in the system, then, of course, we will begin to migrate to a lower tariff regime for the industry. Mr. Chairman, I will recommend same to the incoming minister, and I know him very well. I'm sure he will take it up for the benefit of the AGI.
Chairman, may I just know from the nominee whether he is compliant with his tax obligations and also compliant with his asset declaration requirements to hold the high office of minister? Thank you, Chair.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman, I'm done, but just a commentary that our oil resources are not infinite, to quote you. Indeed, I have a World Bank report here that I'm reviewing, and they are projecting that by 2050, Ghana may have exploited largely this oil and gas that we have done. Having worked at the Ministry of Energy, Do you see anything that needs to change with our petroleum revenue management regime? Do you see any need? And what are your recommendations? Thank you, Chair.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, our replacement ratio, of course, is very low. Production to reserve, it's low. And so additional reserves at each particular point in time is a key index for any emerging country like Ghana. The resources, it's not finite, as rightly said. And so what we need to change is to see how we can attract global funds to Ghana. Unfortunately for us, Mr. President, Mr. Chairman, global funds these days have been limited because of the growth in renewables. Some funding have their restriction, and if it is going to be a conventional resources like fossil fuel, the system will not allow that to grow. So the fear for the country is that if you are not careful, we may still have oil underground, but we will not be able to extract it. Mr. Chairman, you recollect when we leave the Stone Age, the stone didn't finish. There were a lot of stones at the time the world migrated from the Stone Age. That is why it becomes very important for a country like Ghana to begin to create more conducive physical regimes that can attract the IOCs to come in and exploit the resources as quickly as possible. Resources beneath the ground has no value until you brought it out. So yes, I agree with you. Things need to change, and one of the fundamental things that we need to change is our fiscal regime. Thank you.
Chairman, just a comment. Sand Power was signed in 2010 and not 2016. In your exchange with the Honorable Muntaka, that came up very strongly. The Sand Power agreement, from the records available to me, was signed in 2010 and not 2016. And having been Minister for Energy, there is a lot of talk, even in the budget statement that I can refer to here, excess capacity, excess capacity. You know, apart from the fact that energy was critical to our development, investors need some assurance from government. What other assurance could you give as Minister for Energy in those circumstances, apart from excess production of what you generated and what you probably needed? Because banks will take comfort in a government security and guarantee than an individual private sector person just telling them that I'm going to produce this megawatts of power for Ghana. Can you respond to that? Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not quite clear with the question. If Honourable Member can please come out.
No, I just want to get an explanation from you that when we get unnecessarily critical of excess capacity or excess generated power, we lose sight of the fact that you needed to be bankable. Those private sector players needed to be bankable and could only be given assurance by government, which government could only be to give guarantee that there is security for those production. That probably, in my view, accounted for what is described largely as excess no-need energy capacity.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, one of the problems that we've had over the past was procuring generation without competition. Most of the generators that we have today have undergone through negotiation. And so if you really want to send a clear signal to investors to have some interest within your power sector, I think the best way is to go on competitive process for procuring power purchase agreement. And I would think that that is the way to go. Investors may not necessarily be looking at the country as not being friendly in terms of the power sector system, but any emerging country in this sort of power generation have these experiences, from one level to another. So the assurance I want to give to investors, especially in the sector, is that our power demands is about 200 megawatts on annual basis. So we should not just begin to procure power when we have not achieved that level of demand. Of course, demand will have to meet with supply. But as a country, are we saying that we'll wait for demand to grow before we bring in supply? Or we want to put in the supply and for demand to grow and meet? We have to decide. If you are going to put in the supply for demand to meet, of course, we must be prepared to pay for that.
Chairman, my final comment. This weekend, I drove past Palogo to Nalergo, Gambaga, to Lengbensi. The Palogo power project that was brought to Parliament almost 800 to 900 million US dollars. I did not see any sign of commencement of work. What is the status of it?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That is true. The contractor has written to our office for advanced mobilization. They deploy their staffs to the work to start some ground investigation in terms of the soil exercise, which they're currently doing. The delay is as a result of funding. Don't forget, this project is solely on the balance sheet of government. And as and when I'm sure Finance Minister release the mobilization, that they requested, I will expect work to progress speedily as possible.
Chairman, Minister, your advice, and this is my final, I keep to it, Chairman. Bagre Dam, spillage, the spillage of the Bagre Dam and its consequence on agriculture, on houses, on livelihood. As Minister for Energy, what do you think we can do right to save lives and to prevent the continuous yearly and seasonal spillage from Bagre?
Best approach is to capture the running water for purpose of irrigation, and that has its own cost implication. Unfortunately, over the period, a lot of lives have been lost. But it's also on record the amount of work this government put in terms of some activities to constrain the spillage of the road. But in my own view, I think the only option and alternative that is available for government is to make sure that we capture the water for purpose of irrigation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, Honorable Dominic, thank you for attending upon the House. I have no question for you. You're discharged. You've had a long day.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm most grateful to the Honorable House. Thank you.
Honorable members, it's 6:30. We'll resume in 15 minutes. 15 minutes, 6:45.